The 10,146th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. I would like to warmly welcome the high-level representatives present in the Security Council chamber. Your presence today underscores the importance of the subject matter under discussion. In accordance with the Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Armenia, Australia, Austria, Belgium, Brazil, Bulgaria, Canada, Cuba, Djibouti, Egypt, Iceland, India, Indonesia, Iraq, Ireland, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Israel, Japan, Jordan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Lebanon, Lithuania, Malaysia, Maldives, Malta, Mauritania, Mexico, the Federal States of Micronesia, Morocco, Namibia, the Kingdom of Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Oman, Philippines, Poland, Portugal, Qatar, the Republic of Korea, Romania, Saudi Arabia, Slovenia, South Africa, Spain, Sri Lanka, Switzerland, the Syrian Arab Republic, Thailand, Timor-Leste, Tunisia, Turkey, Uganda, the United Arab Emirates, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, Vietnam, and Yemen to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with the Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Khalid Khayari, Assistant Secretary General, Departments of Political and Peace-Building Affairs and Peace Operations, and Mr. Tony Blair, Member of the Executive Board of the Board of Peace. It is so decided. In accordance with the Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I also invite the following to participate in this meeting. His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Abul Ghait, Secretary General of the League of Arab States, His Excellency Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis, Head of Delegation of the European Union to the United Nations, His Excellency Mr. Umar Hadi, Vice Chair of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, and His Excellency Mr. Paul Beresford Hill, Permanent Observer of the Sovereign Order of Malta to the United Nations. It is so decided. I propose that the Council invite the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the Observer State of Palestine to participate in the meeting in accordance with the Provisional Rules of Procedure and the previous practice in this regard. There being no objection, it is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Khalid Khiyari.
Mr. President, members of the Security Council, I'm briefing you today at a moment of profound regional tension and instability, which is impacting the lives and livelihoods of hundreds of millions across the region and beyond. The tension and hostilities that have upended the Middle East over the past weeks have shifted attention from the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory. Away from the spotlight, the situation in Gaza and West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is steadily worsening. The population in Gaza faces ongoing and deadly Israeli strikes and dire humanitarian conditions, while in the West Bank, violence, including rampant settler violence, displacement, and accelerating settlement activity are threatening entire communities and further eroding the prospects for a political process that will resolve the conflict on the basis of a viable two-state solution. Mr. President, in Gaza, the ceasefire is increasingly fragile as Israeli strikes and armed activities by Hamas and other groups continue. While diplomatic efforts are ongoing with the goal of consolidating the ceasefire and implementing Phase 2 of the comprehensive plan endorsed by United Nations Security Council in Resolution 2803, talks on the disarmament of resulted in an agreement, raising concerns over the potential return to widespread hostilities. Civilians continue to bear the brunt of the ongoing violence. According approximately 800 Palestinians, including more than 200 children and 7 humanitarian personnel, have been killed as a result of Israeli strikes, shelling, and gunfire. The Israel Defense Forces has stated that its strikes have targeted Hamas militants and facilities. Overwhelming. Some 1.8 million people, nearly the entire population of Gaza, are displaced and living in facilities, devastated infrastructure, and rising public health risks. While some improvements in access and aid access, limited operational crossings, and restrictions on critical humanitarian items termed dual use items by Israel continue to constrain UN response. Particularly water, sanitation, and health are again on the brink of collapse. Plans must be advanced urgently, not only for the humanitarian aid, but also for early recovery under construction. On 20 April, the United Nations and the European Union released the final Gaza Rapid Damage and Needs Assessment conducted jointly with the World Bank. According to the assessment, recovery under construction needs in Gaza are estimated at $71.4 billion over the next decade, including $26.3 billion required in the first 18 months to restore essential services, rebuild critical infrastructure, and support economic recovery. To begin addressing the staggering needs across the OPT, the United Nations has recently launched the Horizon Fund, co-chaired by Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa and Deputy Special Coordinator Ramiz Al-Akbarov. This fund will enable the United Nations to implement early recovery planning across the entire OPT, in line with United Nations resolutions and international law. We deeply appreciate Member States' contributions to the fund to date. In order to advance recovery, the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza must be allowed to fulfill its governance and administrative roles as outlined in the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2803 in coordination with the Palestinian Authority, while the other elements of the comprehensive plan are implemented in full. These include the disarmament of Hamas and all other armed groups in Gaza, Israeli withdrawal from the Strip, and the deployment of the International Stabilization Force. Mr. President, turning to the West Bank between 14 March and 16 April, Israeli Authority advanced plans for 1,080 housing units in the West Bank, including 680 in several settlements in Area C, and planned for 400 housing units in East Jerusalem. On 25th of March, the Israeli cabinet approved 34 settlements across Area C. These include new settlements, regularization of existing outposts and neighborhoods of existing settlements, representing the most extensive such approval to date in a single cabinet decision. During the reporting period, 21 Palestinians, including 6 children, were killed by Israeli forces or settlers in West Bank, and 310, including 45 children, were injured. According to Israeli sources, 1 Israeli was killed and 11 injured, including 1 woman, in Palestinian attacks against Israelis. The frequency and severity of settler attacks continue to increase. Entire Palestinian communities now routinely facing lethal violence, vandalism, and harassment, often in the presence of Israeli soldiers or with their participation. I note of recent expression of concern by some Israeli officials regarding settler violence and call on the authorities to take immediate action to stop the violence. The situation in North and West Bank refugee camps remains alarming. Israeli military operations and access restrictions have led to the prolonged displacement of more than 33,000 residents from Jenin, Tulkarem, and Nur Shams refugee camps. These camps remain largely empty, marking the largest and longest displacement crisis in the West Bank in decades. Mr. President, economic conditions across the West Bank also continue to deteriorate. Rising costs, limited access to employment, and movement restrictions are undermining livelihoods and increasing reliance on humanitarian assistance. The Palestinian Authority faces an existential fiscal crisis that threatens the institutional foundations of a future independent Palestinian state. 9 months of withheld clearance revenues, public debt exceeding $14 billion, and mounting pressures on correspondent banking arrangements leave the Palestinian Authority without the fiscal tools required to sustain itself. Mr. President, on a positive note, on 25th of April, Palestinians seized an important opportunity to exercise their democratic rights by participating in local elections in most of the West Bank and in Deir el-Balah in the Gaza Strip. The United Nations commends the Palestinian Central Elections Commission for its credible administration of the electoral process, given the significant challenges present in the West Bank and the extraordinarily difficult conditions prevailing in Gaza. The United Nations remains committed to supporting and strengthening Palestinian institutions and promoting democratic governance. Mr. President, turning to the region, the United Nations welcomes the 3-week extension of the cessation of hostilities between Israel and Lebanon and the ongoing talks facilitated by the United States. We remain ready to support these efforts and continue to urge the full implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701 toward a permanent ceasefire and long-term solution to the conflict. On the ground, the situation remains extremely fragile amid ongoing violence, with continued strikes by Hezbollah and Israel, violations of Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and the possession of weapons outside of Lebanese state authority. We urge all actors to exercise maximum restraint, fully respect the cessation of hostilities, and to comply with their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, at all times. There is no military solution to this conflict. Diplomacy is the path towards sustainable peace. 6 peacekeepers, 4 Indonesians, and 2 French, serving with the interim force of Lebanon, have been killed since the 2nd of March, with several more injured. We reiterate our strong condemnation of all attacks on peacekeepers and extend our deepest condolences to their family and friends, as well as to the governments and people of Indonesia and France. Attacks on peacekeepers are unacceptable and must be promptly investigated so that those responsible must be held accountable. The safety and security of United Nations personnel and the inviolability of United Nations property must be respected by all. On the Golan, the Israeli Defense Forces remained on the Bravo side and currently maintain 11 positions, 8 in the area of separation and 3 in area of limitation in the vicinity of the Bravo line. The IDF continues to carry out operations on the Bravo side, including night search operations in villages and in some cases detaining civilians. Some of the civilians were released following interrogation by the Israeli Defense Forces, while others remain in detention in Israel. Mr. President, resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains central to achieving durable peace in the region, as it continues to fuel instability across the Middle East. The meetings of 20 April of the Global Alliance for the Implementation of the Two-State Solution and the Ad hoc Liaison Committee underscored the ongoing commitment of the international community to preserving what has been built over the past decades, identifying and reversing the deeply destructive current trends on the ground, and finding ways to translate political will into concrete policy steps on the ground, backed by financial commitments. Despite the current challenges, and as also emphasized in the Global Alliance and ASLC meetings, there is no alternative to a political solution. A political framework that clearly advances the parties toward an end to the occupation and the achievement of a viable two-state solution is essential both to sustainably addressing the urgent needs on the ground and to achieving a just and lasting peace. The United Nations remains committed to supporting all efforts toward this goal. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Khayari for his briefing. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Espen Barth Eide, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Norway and representative of the Ad hoc Liaison Committee.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank the Security Council and its presidency, the Kingdom of Bahrain, for allowing me to brief the Council today in my capacity as the chair of the Ad hoc Liaison Committee. And I particularly thank His Excellency Dr. Abdulatif bin Rashid Al Zayyan for chairing this meeting and inviting me. Ever since the HALC was established in 1993, the committee has brought together the parties to the conflict, the key donor countries, and the international organizations with expertise in Palestinian economy. Its ultimate aim is to achieve self-determination for the Palestinian people within a two-state solution with security and dignity for Israelis and Palestinians alike. The HALC met again on Monday, 20th April, last week. I believe that this meeting led to some positive developments, which I'm very pleased to share with this Council. President, Resolution 2803, adopted by this Council on the 18th of November 2025, endorsed President Trump's 20-point peace plan to end the Gaza conflict and create a credible pathway to Palestinian statehood. The peace plan offered new dynamics. The ceasefire in Gaza significantly reduced civilian casualties after years of suffering. Living and deceased hostages were finally returned home to Israel. The resolution also authorized new transitional institutional architecture. It is vital that we do not lose this important momentum. Last week, the HALC brought together key stakeholders, first and foremost Palestine, represented by their Prime Minister, His Excellency Mohammed Mustafa, but also the Board of Peace as a special guest for an important conversation in Brussels. The meeting was co-hosted with the European Union's High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy, Ms. Kaja Kallas. On our agenda was the question of how to implement the 20-point plan and how to improve the situation on the ground in Palestine. One objective of last week's meeting was to establish a clear link between the new temporary structures established under Resolution 2803 and the pre-existing already established structures. This in turn should help consolidate alignment around unified coordination mechanisms. This is essential in order to speed up implementation on the ground, to mobilize donors for early recovery in Gaza, which is so urgently needed, and also to safeguard the economy in the West Bank. President, Resolution 2803 welcomed the establishment of the Board of Peace in Gaza. While some states have joined the Board of Peace, other states, like my own, have chosen not to join. Still, we are convinced that we need to work together to implement this critical resolution that we all support. I would like to commend the United States for their essential role in reaching the ceasefire last October. Continued strong US engagement is key in order to move forward. As highlighted in the HALC meeting last week, Hamas's weapons must be decommissioned. This is essential for the plan to work. But this again must happen in a context. The mediators' efforts must be supported so that full recovery and the aspirations of the Palestinians can move forward. Coordinated donor support is critical to humanitarian relief, recovery, and reconstruction in Gaza. The HALC aims to consolidate such efforts and to gather all stakeholders in the same room in goals. The dedicated liaison committee between the PA, the Palestinian Authority, and the Board of Peace institutions, and the meeting between the Palestinian Prime Minister and the Board of Peace High Representative for Gaza, held in the margins of HALC, are important examples of the coordination urgently needed. The rapid damage and needs assessment that was already referred to was undertaken by the World Bank, the UN, and the European Union together, and published on the day of the HALC meeting. This document constitutes an important basis for recovery and reconstruction efforts. In line with the report and Palestinian plans, donors should scale up assistance through the World Bank instruments, the UN Multi-Donor Trust Fund, Horizon, and other mechanisms for humanitarian support. President, civilians in Palestine, both in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, continue to suffer. The Palestinian economy remains severely constrained, notably by Israeli access and movement restrictions, fiscal challenges, limited Palestinian control over natural resources, and a weakened private sector. There is deep concern among HALC members about growing risks of systemic collapse of the Palestinian institutions and their economy, with ensuing risk to basic public service provision and potential public security implications. Palestinian hospitals, schools, courts, police may stop functioning. Banks may be at risk. This situation is also jeopardizing the pathway to Palestinian self-determination and independent statehood, long-standing and legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. While improving economic prospects, structural change, and a comprehensive political solution, it will be crucial in the short term to scale up immediate financial support to the Palestinian institutions built over decades with donor support. At our meeting last week, members of the HALC acknowledged the Palestinian Authority's progress in advancing important reforms under challenging circumstances. They encouraged continued efforts on this path. President, Resolution 2803 was an innovative resolution that established new transitional structures in Gaza. It has taken some time to integrate these new structures with the pre-existing structures for assistance and development. At the HALC meeting, we came a long way in committing donors to a coherent, coordinated, and consolidated effort toward our shared objective of improving conditions on the ground. However, further action is required. As chair of the HALC, I call on Hamas to decommission its weapons without delay. The 20-point plan hinges on this essential piece. It must be a sequential process with steps including guarantees, monitoring mechanisms, and overarching security architecture and confidence-building measures. I call on the government of Palestine to continue its reform efforts, including to prepare for its resumption of governance in Gaza in line with the 20-point plan and the Security Council Resolution 2803. I call on the government of Israel to lift restrictions on access and movement, to ensure continued flow and clearance revenues in full, to lift the cap on repatriation of physical shekels, and secure the corresponding banking relations, to reverse expansion of settlements, address settler violence, and hold perpetrators accountable. Israel must furthermore allow for the unimpeded delivery of sustained distribution of humanitarian aid at scale into aid throughout Gaza in accordance with international humanitarian law. As for the international community, it should increase assistance at scale and in a timely fashion to the Palestinian people, including budget support and direct assistance to strengthen the Palestinian Authority and enable its reform efforts under a critical moment in time. All parties and UN member states should support implementation of the 20-point peace plan and resolution 2803, including through financial support through World Bank financing instruments and to the United Nations. We should also welcome and support the procedures agreed between the Palestinian Authority and the Transitional Board of Peace institutions. And I want to highlight this. It was made crystal clear by all parties at the meeting in Brussels last week that the transitional arrangements are indeed that, transitional and administrative, and that there is only one recognized government in Palestine. I left the meeting convinced that this important clarification will help facilitate better two-way cooperation between the Palestinian Authority and the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. President, the purpose of Resolution 2803 adopted by this Council is to ensure that the ceasefire and President Trump's 20-point plan is implemented for every people in the region to finally live in peace. It is the duty of all of us to do our utmost to support the parties in this endeavor and to, step by step, lay the groundwork for a better future. I thank you, Chair.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Ide, for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Tony Blair, member of the Executive Board of the Board of Peace.
Mr. President, it's my honor to give the Council an update on Gaza following the briefing given by High Representative Nikolai Mladenov in March. When Mr. Mladenov spoke to this Council, he vividly described the horrors of the October 7, 2023 attack on Israel and the devastation in Gaza following the conflict. I adopt that description and do not need to repeat it. Instead, I shall focus on Gaza as it is now and where we stand with the implementation of President Trump's comprehensive 20-point plan endorsed in UN Security Council Resolution 2803. Mr. President, the situation in Gaza remains precarious. The war has stopped, violence has fallen dramatically, but ceasefire violations continue. Food assistance has improved. The Rafah crossing is partially open, particularly for medical evacuations. More truckloads of humanitarian aid and commercial goods are entering Gaza to address basic needs. But much more must be done to improve shelter, health, water, and sanitation. Life remains desperate for many. And in one half of Gaza are the people and Hamas, in the other, the Israeli Defense Forces. The hope resides in the substantial progress made in the implementation of the President's plan, including the formation of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, NCAG, the International Stabilization Force, which has completed its pre-deployment assessment mission, and in funding for Gaza, with now over $7 billion of firm pledges. The recent AHLC meeting, as we've just heard, showed the breadth of support for Gaza and its people. And the critical demilitarization talks with Hamas are continuing, led with immense efforts by the mediators of Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, together with the High Representative and representatives of the Board of Peace. So, Mr. President, we've reached a pivotal juncture. And I urge Council members support for the implementation of the 20-point plan and to mobilize financial contributions for the humanitarian response and recovery in Gaza through the United Nations and World Bank in full coordination with NCAG, backed by the Board of Peace. The reason President Trump's peace plan succeeded in bringing the war in Gaza to an end was that it was based on a strategically coherent framework. It was clear after October the 7th that Israel would never tolerate a situation in which the organization responsible would continue in power. And clear also that a perpetual cycle of conflict would destroy any possibility of a decent future for Gaza's people. This was the worst. On previous occasions, they ended not in a solution, but effectively in a series of truces. This time, the scale of destruction, and indeed the determination of President Trump, led us to propose something fundamentally different, harder, more ambitious, but which, if done, will endure because it deals This United States administration, in my view, has understood two very crucial things. First, not just that Israel is entitled to protect its security, but that it will protect its security. Therefore, there will be no peace in Gaza unless the threat that it will be used as a launching pad for violence against Israel is ended. And that the people of Gaza cannot prosper if pinned between the Israeli Defense Forces on the one side and Hamas on the other. First, Hamas, as presently constituted, can have no role in governing Gaza, not directly running the government in Gaza, not indirectly by retaining their weapons and therefore their power. Were Hamas to change, to agree that the goal of a Palestinian state should be pursued through political negotiation and that such a state should live in peace with the state of Israel, it would be free to engage with the politics of Gaza as with any other party which accepts these internationally agreed principles. But until it does so, it cannot. It follows from this that Hamas and every other armed group in Gaza should disarm, decommission weapons as part of what is a Palestinian-led process with monitored and verified implementation. The new government of Gaza should be the sole legitimate authority with arms. This is expressly set out in the demilitarization part of Resolution 2803. Second, equally important but often overlooked, the plan also provides that if the disarmament occurs, then the network of restrictions on people and goods entering and leaving Gaza, in other words, what has made daily life in Gaza so difficult and Gaza's economic future so constrained, that network then loses its rationale and should and will be lifted. This is a huge prize for people in Gaza. The plans for reconstruction being worked upon by the Board of Peace, the OHR, the NCAG, are based on this premise. Gaza not rebuilt, but reimagined. A port, free movement of people and goods, proper infrastructure, new housing, fully able to access the digital economy. And third, because trust is so low and skepticism high, we need a transitional period where international support is necessary to help Gaza on its feet and disarmament happen in a manner Israel will accept. That's why we established the NCAG, an apolitical transitional governing body of respected Palestinians with the highly capable Dr. Ali Shath as its head, the Office of High Representative under the excellent leadership of Nikolai Mladenov, who also liaises with the Palestinian Authority, an international stabilization force to give credibility to the new security arrangements and new civil police force, and then oversight from the Board of Peace, which under American leadership binds together the key countries in the region along with many others. So we need Hamas to agree with the process of demilitarization of Gaza and to abide by its terms. And we need Israel to abide by its obligations under that same process. Once there is agreement, that will unlock immediately vital progress for the people of Gaza. Additional humanitarian aid and material, new medical facilities, greater freedom at the crossings, including Rafah, the staged withdrawal of Israeli forces, and entry into Gaza of the NCAG. And then on completion of the process, there will be the full withdrawal of Israeli forces in accordance with the terms of the process and freedom for the Gaza people. Mr. President, UN Security Council Resolution 2803 also references a political horizon, a time when a reformed Palestinian Authority resumes control of both Gaza and West Bank, and the possibility of a pathway to a Palestinian state. For many, adherence to the notion of two states is an article of faith. But truthfully, for obvious reasons, many Israelis, indeed many Palestinians, have given up believing it. As I learnt in Northern Ireland, after years of bloodshed, people do come to disbelieve. Trust is zero. Those who try to make peace considered naive. But so also is the notion of total victory. In the 25 years I've been involved in this issue, in many different guises, the population of Israel has risen by over 50%. That of the Palestinians by over 70%. Neither people is going anywhere. The state of Israel will remain, and so will the Palestinian people. So our task is to help the parties create the conditions for peaceful coexistence. That's why we devised this plan for Gaza. If implemented, its people can be prosperous and Israel secure. It's why we also need to address the urgent situation in the West Bank so Palestinians there can share in that prosperity and peace. If Israel is no longer under threat, there is no reason to deny the Palestinian people self-government. If the Palestinians know that this is an attainable objective, dependent on their own efforts, there is every reason to pursue that objective peacefully. Gaza is the test for all of us, whether we repeat the history or we change it. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Blair for his briefing. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Minister for Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the Observer State of Palestine.
Mr. President, allow me at the outset to express our appreciation for your decision to convene this meeting at ministerial level and preside over it. I also wish to express our full solidarity with your country and people and the other Arab countries confronted with outrageous attacks against their sovereignty and territorial integrity. Secretary General Khayari, to the Foreign Minister of Norway and Chair of the AHLC, Dear Espen, and Mr. Tony Blair, Member of the Executive Board of the Board of Peace, for their briefings and their efforts. Mr. President, in devastated Gaza, while many lives were saved by the ceasefire, undertaken by President Trump, which secured, together with those of other countries and mediators, Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, a ceasefire agreement that must be fully upheld. The situation of the Palestinian civilian population must be a top priority in this regard. The killing of Palestinians, including children, by Israel must allowing shelter in or the restrictions on aid and humanitarian access. The spread of rodents and diseases delays in restoration of basic services and recovery, and the human and humanitarian consequences of this man-made reality demand immediate attention and response. We reiterate the need for coordinated efforts to address the Board of Peace for that purpose. We welcome the convening of two important international meetings in Brussels: the Global Alliance for the and the EU, and the Ad hoc Liaison Committee chaired by Norway and co-sponsored by the EU and the United States. Both meetings highlight the understanding of the international community for this resolve to be translated into transformative action. As we embark on phase 2 of the ceasefire, one law and one gun, and the need for full Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. Gaza is an integral part of Palestine, and transitional arrangements must be conducive to the reunification of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip under the Palestinian Authority, as foreseen by this Council, leading to Palestinian self-determination and displacement and devastation. It is time for life, healing, recovery, and reconstruction. It's essential not to derail these efforts by pursuing policies and annexation. It is clear Israel still pursues the including East Jerusalem. Mr. President, annexation is prohibited under the United Nations Charter and under peremptory norms of international law. It's a crime against peace, and it is rejected by the world and President Trump himself. This Council, the General Assembly, and the International Court of Justice have all condemned annexation. Yet annexation is underway in legislation, in policies, and in measures in full defiance of the law and of the will of the international community. It destroys Palestinian community and the prospects for peace. Israel has further escalated its military incursions, settlement expansion, settler terror against prisoners, including the death penalty law, severe restrictions on movement, demolition of homes, fragmenting the land, and isolating and uprooting communities by the tens of thousands. In parallel, the Israeli government seeks the West Bank, like destruction in Gaza, as a means to force people to leave by creating impossible conditions of life. In this context, Israel's withholding of our tax revenues is not merely a financial matter. It's an existential threat against Palestinian institutions and the people they serve. It further undermines our people's right to education, to health, to water, to safety, and much more, and is a matter of international peace and security deserving the immediate attention and action of this Council. Mr. President, in 2019, settlers shot and killed 38-year-old Hamdi al-Nassan, a father and a husband. A few days ago, in an attack by Israeli soldiers and settlers near a school in Al-Mughayr, Aus al-Nassan, the 14-year-old son of Hamdi, was himself shot dead. A father and a son killed a few years apart, victims of the same violence. The world condemned settler terrorism then and condemned it again now. But our communities, our people, and our children were never afforded the protection they deserve, the protection they are entitled to, and the protection they desperately need. The situation today is extremely alarming as settlers terrorize Palestinians on a daily basis. This has to stop immediately. In this Council, security is often mentioned when it comes to the Middle East, but it rarely refers to the blatant Mr. President, our response to this devastating reality could have been paralysis, rejectionism, or violence. We chose a different path to reaffirm our commitment to liberation by peaceful means and our attacks against civilians, whether Palestinian or Israeli. We have engaged positively with regional and international efforts that led to the adoption of the New York Declaration. We have welcomed the Trump peace plan and are working constructively with the US administration. We have embarked on reforms and advanced them in impossible circumstances, where instead of being empowered to pursue them, we are being undermined. 2 days ago, we organized local elections, including in Deir el-Balah in Gaza, as part of our efforts to exercise our democratic life. Help us demonstrate to the Palestinian people that the peaceful path does lead to freedom, peace, and prosperity. Mr. President, the Israeli foreign minister sat around this table a couple of months ago to defend illegal Israeli settlements and claiming that Palestinians building in their own land was illegal. He negated the very existence of Palestine, claiming it was a pure invention when our existence is undeniable. He added, since there is no Palestine, how could its land be occupied? His bulldozers and his armed settlers, whose land they are stealing, whose lives they are shattering, if not Palestinian land and Palestinian lives. Mr. President, I came to you from the Holy Land. Every square meter is filled with history and spirituality. All monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, have a deep connection to this land. The Israeli foreign minister fell short in his explanation as he stressed only one connection, espousing exclusivity. Let me remind, this is also the birthplace of Christianity, where Jesus was born, lived, preached, was crucified, and resurrected. This is the land where Al-Aqsa, the first of the two Qiblas, stands in the heart of Jerusalem, the city from which Prophet Muhammad ascended to the heavens. Diversity is this land's destiny. It's a blessing, not a curse. There's no space here for exclusivity, monopoly, or supremacy. When Israel claims respect to this diversity, it should question its commanders that order bombing of churches and mosques, its soldiers who deny celebration of Palm Sunday, or who attack pilgrims on Holy Saturday or during Ramadan, its ministers who perform Talmudic rituals at Al-Haram al-Sharif, and Israeli governments breaching the historic status quo which has been essential for peaceful coexistence of people of all faiths in Jerusalem, in the Holy Land, and transcending them across the globe. This is not a religious conflict, and the outrageous claim that persecution of Palestinians is justified by a so-called war between the Judeo-Christian civilization against Islamic barbarism should be rejected by all. This narrative aims at making this conflict impossible to resolve and irresponsibly inflames tensions among communities. For us Palestinians, regardless of our faith, this conflict is about the negation of our rights and of our existence in our ancestral land. It will end with the end of the occupation and the recognition of our rights and the independence of our state. The two-state solution based on international legitimacy is the only way forward. Mr. President, we will not achieve a brighter and more secure future by negating each other's existence, by inflaming historical and religious claims, or by trying to justify monopoly and supremacy on a land whose history and geography have defined it as a land of pluralism and diversity. This is a dead end. How many more people have to die for all of us to choose another path? That path exists. It is within reach if we finally make the right choices. It means a world in which Palestine and its people are free, and Palestinians and Israelis live side by side in security, a world in which two states, Israel and Palestine, are at peace. That peace is only possible among equals, not between oppressor and oppressed, occupier and occupied, dominant and subjects. It will not be achieved by more violence, more dehumanization, and more wars. It must be based on mutual recognition, on justice, not vengeance, on a vision for the future, not a perpetuation of the evils of the past, on shared humanity, where we all are endowed with the same rights and every life is sacred. Peace and unleashing of the potential of peoples in our region are long, long overdue. Mr. President, let me end by reminding that the Ketuvim says, seek peace and pursue it. The Quran says, O mankind, we created you from a male and a female and made you into peoples and tribes so that you may know one another. The Bible says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Blessed are the peacemakers who can finally reconcile this land with its true name and purpose, a land of peace and a beacon for the world. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Her Excellency, Ms. Aga Bekian, for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I would like to thank the briefers today for their briefings. Mr. President, for more than 2 years since October 7th, Israel has been fighting a war that was forced upon us, a war for our survival across multiple fronts: Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Iranian-backed militias across the region, above them all, the head of the snake, Iran. This was not spontaneous. It was a planned strategy with a single goal: Israel's destruction, built over years through proxies, weapons, and a growing missile program. It is a kind of threat the international system was not designed to confront. This Council must understand our reality. Let me begin with Iran. We support the US objective to bring a real end to Iran's nuclear military program, its support for terrorist proxies, and to restrict its ballistic missile capabilities. Iran must understand it has no leverage. The choice is simple: comply or face the consequences. Iran has refused to comply, and instead it's trying to exert pressure and to exploit the global economy. What we are witnessing in the Strait of Hormuz is a direct assault on international law. Commercial vessels are being threatened, navigation is being obstructed, safe passage is no longer guaranteed. Freedom of navigation is not optional. It is a legal right, and now we hear it openly. An Iranian lawmaker confirmed that Iran is charging ships to pass through the strait. Let us be clear. This is not regulation, like they say. This is not security. This is piracy. Not rogue actors or isolated criminals, but a state actor using fear to control a global waterway, a toll extracted through intimidation, a signal to the world that lawful passage can be turned on and off at will. So I ask the representative of Iran, Mr. Ravani, do you see yourself as the captain of these waters? Are you playing Captain Hook, demanding payment for passage? Because stopping ships and charging for passage is not authority. It is piracy. Piracy 2026. While much of the world is focused on Iran, Israel is still confronting its proxies, including Hamas in Gaza. Mr. President, a framework was put on the table. We heard Mr. Blair. Last month, we were all briefed here by Nikolai Mladenov. Hamas responded the same way it always does: rejection, delay, excuses. Israel, meanwhile, is implementing our side of the deal. All major crossings are open. Every day, over 600 trucks of aid enter Gaza. Since the ceasefire began, we have facilitated the entry of 1.5 million tons of food into Gaza. In just the past week, over 60,000 kilograms of food delivered, more than 700,000 liters of fuel transferred, thousands of vaccines for children. At Rafah, 150 patients are crossing daily for treatment. While the world is fixated on Israel, the cruelty of Hamas is being ignored. No one mentioned it here. Just last week, the UK's Daily Mail reported that Gazans living under Hamas rule are beginning to break their silence. They described sexual violence by Hamas terrorists, blackmail for aid or money, and abuse by those in positions of power. In one account, a Gazan man described a woman in his neighborhood who was blackmailed by, and I quote, one of Hamas's charity organizations. They wanted her to sell herself in exchange for a food parcel or an aid voucher. That is what life looks like under Hamas. Additional Daily Mail reporting says young boys in Gaza have been raped and that Hamas uses rape as a tactic to recruit and control them through fear and blackmail. Families describe being too afraid to speak for fear of Hamas violence and targeting. While this is happening, Hamas is doing what it always does, rejecting Gaza's disarmament plan, delaying, refusing to disarm, slowly but surely tightening its grip in the areas it controls in Gaza and exploiting vulnerable Gazans. And yet, where is the outrage? Where are the investigations? Where are the headlines? We all remember the campaign, All Eyes on Rafah. Where are the eyes on Gaza now? Where are all the human rights organizations? When it comes to Hamas, there is silence. But when Israel is falsely accused, there is outrage by default. Mr. President, some of our briefers today have mentioned the situation in Judea and Samaria, and I'm sure we will hear from my colleagues about it shortly. Israel condemns all violence against both Israeli and Palestinian civilians. Implemented the new government's directive on combating nationalist crimes in Judea and Samaria. This includes strengthening supervision tools to monitor and enforce restrictions, improving reporting mechanisms to expand access and accountability. These are real actions, not just words. With expanded powers and resources. But to understand the situation, you must look at the full picture, not just at one side of the equation. Extremist violence by Israelis exists, but it is significantly smaller in scale compared to the scale of attacks carried out by Palestinian terrorists in Judea and Samaria. Yet, that is not how this issue is presented. The term we hear here in this council, settler violence, how many times, is used as a blanket label. It suggests that an entire community is defined by violence. That is simply not true. Samaria. They go to work, they send their children to school, they volunteer and contribute positively to the society. They are decent, law-abiding, peaceful people. Dozens, not even hundreds, were engaged in criminal activity. They are condemned, they are investigated, they are indicted, they are convicted. But instead of being treated as individual criminals, their actions are used to define an entire population. Israelis are involved in criminal activity, and it's criminal activity. People use a collective label, settler violence. All of them. But when Palestinian radicals, not all of them, when the radicals carry out attacks, the language becomes individual, specific, limited to only those responsible. To an entire population. That is distortion. That is hypocrisy. Mr. President, in relation to Lebanon, we hear many statements from this council, many calls for calm, for a ceasefire, for peace, but one word is often missing. Also in the statements, I saw some draft statements about declarations you want to present later on this week. You forget to mention one word, Hezbollah. No one is mentioning Hezbollah. Just days ago, the Secretary General put a statement, and I quote, "I strongly condemn Saturday's attack on UNIFIL, during which one French peacekeeper was killed and 3 were injured. These attacks must stop. All actors must respect the cessation of hostilities and the ceasefire." All actors? All actors? How can you speak about all actors without naming the terrorist group responsible? How can you condemn an attack and refuse to say who carried it out? Because if you cannot name Hezbollah, you cannot confront Hezbollah. And if you cannot confront Hezbollah, you are not addressing the reality on the ground. Hezbollah is not just set on Israel's destruction. It is Lebanon's greatest obstacle to sovereignty. It has weakened the Lebanese government. It has launched approximately 10,000 rockets, missiles, and drones at Israeli civilians since the 2nd of March 2026. It is a global criminal network that funds itself through illicit activity, drug activity, all across Europe. The EU has taken the right step of designation, but now every European country must follow through and enforce it in practice. Mr. President, Israel prefers diplomacy. We have entered direct negotiations with Lebanon for the first time in decades. We are grateful to the United States for advancing these talks. But diplomacy cannot exist in a vacuum. While we negotiate, Hezbollah continues to fire at our civilians. As long as that continues, Israel will act to defend its people. Israel wants, like all of you, to see a stable, sovereign Lebanon. We are ready to work with the Lebanese government. We want to see the Lebanese government capable of enforcing its authority with proper resources. But this Council's support to Lebanon must be conditional on performance and results, not just declarations. Ask them to prove they are actually asserting control. Define the benchmarks. Demand the evidence. Track the results. Make your support conditional on delivery. Because without accountability, there are no results. Without results, there is no stability. Ask them the hard questions. Ask them, how many Hezbollah weapons have they seized? Ask them, which tunnels have they destroyed? Ask them, have they stopped weapons smuggling from Iran across the Syrian border? Ask them, why are the LAF forces still not fully deployed in the south? Ask them, why the Iranian ambassador is still in Beirut? We spoke about it last month. Ask them the hard questions. Mr. President, last week, Israel marked 78 years since its establishment, 78 years of independence, 78 years of defending our people, 78 years of confronting threats that continue to evolve. Today, that responsibility remains. We are facing a coordinated terrorist threat on multiple fronts. The threat is real, it is immediate, it is existential. We will continue to act to protect our people and defend our state. Israel does not want endless wars. We want peace. We want to build. We want to innovate, to work with others in the region. That future is within reach, but it will not happen. Stand up to terror and confront it now, while it is weakened. What happens next will define what comes after. This is a test of whether the international community can adapt to confront those who reject its rules entirely. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for the statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Bahrain. معالي والسعادة السيدات والسادة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسعدني أن أرحب بالجميع وأتقدم بجزيل الشكر لسعادة السيد خالد خياري الأمين العام المساعد في إدارة الشؤون السياسية وبناء السلام، ومعالي السيد اسبن بارت آيدا وزير الشؤون الخارجية للنرويج وممثل لجنة الاتصال المخصصة، ومعالي السيد توني بلير عضو المجلس التنفيذي بمجلس السلام على إحاطاتهم القيمة. وأود أن أؤكد مجددا التزام مملكة البحرين الراسخ بصفتها عضوا غير دائم في مجلس الأمن بالتعاون مع المجتمع الدولي في تعزيز السلم والأمن الدوليين، والسعي الحثيث نحو حل عادل للقضية الفلسطينية لما لها من أهمية بالغة في تحقيق الاستقرار الإقليمي والسلام الدائم في الشرق الأوسط. وبقيادة حضرة صاحب الجلالة الملك حمد بن عيسى آل خليفة ملك البلاد المعظم حفظه الله ورعاه، وتوجيهات صاحب السمو الملكي الأمير سلمان بن حمد آل خليفة ولي العهد رئيس مجلس الوزراء حفظه الله، نؤكد دعمنا الثابت للحقوق المشروعة للشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق، ولا سيما حقه في تقرير المصير وإقامة دولته المستقلة ذات السيادة على حدود 4 يونيو 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية، وذلك وفق مبادرة السلام العربية والقرارات الدولية ذات الصلة. واستجابة للتطورات الأخيرة في الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة، تأكد مملكة البحرين أهمية تنفيذ قرار مجلس الأمن 2803 باعتباره مرجعاً ملزماً لإنهاء النزاع في قطاع غزة وتثبيت وقف إطلاق النار. صاحب الجلالة الملك المعظم في الاجتماع الافتتاحي لمجلس السلام الذي عقد في واشنطن برئاسة فخامة الرئيس دونالد ترامب، لتجسد عدة رسائل إنسانية ودبلوماسية، من أبرزها مساهمة مملكة البحرين بصفتها عضواً في مجلس الأمن في تسهيل تنفيذ الخطة الشاملة للسلام، وتأكيد التزامها بنهج الحوار والدبلوماسية وحل النزاعات سلمياً، وترسيخ قيم التسامح والتعايش السلمي، وهو ما تجسد في مبادرات جلالته خلال ترأسه للقمة العربية في دورتها 33 الداعمة للسلام وإقامة الدولة الفلسطينية المستقلة، فضلاً عن تقديم المساعدات الصحية والتعليمية للمتأثرين من النزاعات، واعتزاز المملكة بشراكتها التاريخية والاستراتيجية مع الشركاء الإقليميين والدوليين. أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، إن تحقيق الاستقرار والتعايش السلمي في منطقة الشرق الأوسط يتطلب احترام الوضع القانوني والتاريخي القائم في مدينة القدس، وصون المقدسات الدينية، ودعم دور المملكة الأردنية الهاشمية في رعاية المقدسات الإسلامية والمسيحية، ومساندة دور لجنة القدس برئاسة جلالة ملك المملكة المغربية الشقيقة، مع الرفض القاطع لأي محاولات للتهجير القسري أو تغيير التركيبة الديمغرافية، ووقف التوسع الاستيطاني غير المشروع في الضفة الغربية، ومنع أي إجراءات غير قانونية أو ممارسات استفزازية من شأنها تقويض فرص السلام أو تأجيج الكراهية والتطرف. وفي سياق متصل، ترى مملكة البحرين أن تحقيق السلام الإقليمي المستدام يتطلب معالجة شاملة لمصادر التوتر والتصعيد والنزاعات في المنطقة، بما يشمل حل الأزمة الإيرانية من خلال حوار جاد وبناء يضمن امتثال إيران لمبادئ حسن الجوار وأحكام القانون الدولي واحترام سيادة الدول وعدم التدخل في شؤونها الداخلية، وضمان حرية الملاحة في مضيق هرمز وسائر الممرات المائية الحيوية، ووقف برامجها النووية والصاروخية والطائرات المسيرة، والامتناع عن تسليح أو تمويل الوكلاء والميليشيات المسلحة، ورفض الاعتداءات غير المبررة التي تنتهك سيادة دول مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية والمملكة الأردنية الهاشمية، استناداً إلى قرار مجلس الأمن 2817 وصولاً إلى تسوية سلمية شاملة تعزز الأمن والاستقرار والازدهار لشعوب المنطقة كافة. وفي الختام تجدد مملكة البحرين تأكيدها في هذه المرحلة الدقيقة على الحاجة الملحة لانتقال المجتمع الدولي من إدارة الأزمات إلى إيجاد حلول لها مع تغليب الحكمة والحوار والدبلوماسية لتحقيق سلام عادل وشامل وتعزيز التعايش والتسامح وبناء مستقبل أكثر أمنا واستقرارا وأملا وازدهارا للجميع. شكرا لكم. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Andraj Vilomsons, State Secretary of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Khaled Khiari, for his informative briefing. I welcome Minister of Foreign Affairs of Norway and representative of the Ad hoc Liaison Committee, Mr. Espen Barth Eide, and thank him for outlining the international community's continued efforts in Gaza and the West Bank. I also welcome the member of the Executive Board of the Board of Peace, Mr. Tony Blair, to this meeting. I thank him for his valuable contribution. Mr. President, over the past 2 months, the Middle East has fallen into a new wave of violence and reignited threats to international peace and security. Iran's decision to take global navigation and shipping hostage by closing the Strait of Hormuz created a grave and immediate global economic and energy crisis. The consequences of Iran's unprovoked attacks against Arab countries in the region, aided by Russia, are felt worldwide. Iran's belligerent actions are totally unacceptable and must stop as set out in Resolution 2817. The recent extension of the ceasefire provides a glimmer of hope that diplomatic efforts will provide lasting solution to the Iranian nuclear issue and the regime's destabilizing activities across the Middle East. We appreciate the mediation efforts of Pakistan and other countries in this regard. Hezbollah has chosen the interests of the IRGC above the interests of the Lebanese people. It has dragged the civilian population into this conflict, who now bear the severe brunt of this escalation. Lebanon is experiencing massive humanitarian crisis. The Lebanese government has made steps towards reestablishing state control throughout the whole territory. Continued and increased international support is necessary to this regard. We welcome the government's decision to ban Hezbollah's military and security activities and encourage further efforts to strengthen the capabilities of the Lebanese army and international security forces in view of implementing Resolution 1701. We reiterate our firm commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon. Latvia welcomes the cessation of hostilities and historic direct talks between Israel and Lebanon, mediated by the United States. We recall that UNIFIL implements the mandate authorized by this Council, and the mission must not be targeted by either side. Latvia condemns in the strongest terms the attacks that have led to the deaths of UNIFIL peacekeepers of Indonesia and France, and have left several peacekeepers severely injured. International humanitarian law is non-negotiable and must be respected in all circumstances. Civilians, medical facilities, and civilian objects such as homes and villages must be protected. Exercising the right of self-defense must not lead to the occupation of the sovereign territory of another country. Mr. President, at a time when international attention is focused on resolving the conflict in the wider Middle East and Lebanon, we must not lose sight of Gaza and West Bank. including East Jerusalem. Despite international community's consistent call to stop the unlawful settlement expansion in the West Bank, the establishment of 34 new settlements was recently approved by Israeli authorities. The spiraling violence is creating immense suffering and increasing security risks for both Palestinians and Israelis. We call on Israeli authorities to take immediate and effective action to prevent further settler attacks and ensure accountability. We condemn policies and threats of forcible displacement and annexation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and urge Israel to abide by its obligations under international law. In alignment with the EU joint statement, we recall that the approval of the death penalty bill by the Israeli parliament marks a grave regression from Israel's own commitments. We are deeply concerned about the de facto discriminatory character of the bill. We await the judgment of the Supreme Court of Israel and call on the government not to implement this law in line with Israel's previous commitments. In Gaza, a fragile ceasefire holds, awaiting the next steps in implementing the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict, put forward by President Trump and endorsed by this Council, Resolution 2803. Tangible restoration of living conditions, including unimpeded access to humanitarian assistance at scale, is urgently needed. Hamas and other non-state armed groups must disarm and relinquish power. We strongly condemn Hamas for rejecting the disarmament plan prepared by Nikolai Mladenov. We look forward to the deployment of the International Stabilization Force and internationally trained Palestinian civil police, as well as the withdrawal of the Israeli forces from Gaza. Along with the urgent need for early recovery and reconstruction, it is necessary to create a social and political environment conducive to a reunited Palestinian government. We congratulate the Palestinian Authority for organizing the municipal elections on 25th April, notwithstanding the multiple challenges. We must continue support for the Palestinian Authority's reform agenda and maintain a political perspective that addresses the security concerns and legitimate aspirations of both Israelis and Palestinians. We reiterate that negotiated two-state solution in accordance with internationally agreed parameters as defined by Security Council resolutions and the New York Declaration remain the only viable path to a lasting peace. Latvia is committed to work with the Council members to this objective. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Willem Sons for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alakbarov and Foreign Minister Aide for their briefings. We are especially happy to have Mr. Tony Blair here in his capacity as Executive Board Member for the Board of Peace, and I thank you, Mr. Blair, for your clarity, for shedding some light on a realistic plan forward. Is frankly quite the contrast from some of the tired talking points we hear in this committee month after month. So thank you for your leadership and clarity, and very pleased to hear the strong collaboration with the Ad Hoc Liaison Committee and the Board of Peace and other mechanisms that were established by Resolution 2803 as we all seek to move forward. Colleagues, I want to be clear that every day matters right now. Every day we either move closer to a future where Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank live in freedom and prosperity at peace with Israel, or we drift back towards chaos, rockets, hostages, and rubble. The American people, President Trump, and our partners on the Board of Peace are working every day towards that brighter vision, towards that future. I just want to share with you a story or a glimpse of that future we saw just last week. Our good friends in the United Arab Emirates helped organize a mass wedding for 300 brides and grooms in Gaza, 20,000 people, families, community leaders, young Palestinians, all celebrated in Deir al-Balah. For just a moment, we witnessed laughter and joy and relative calm. This was no small feat in Gaza. And candidly, without the ceasefire enabled by President Trump, without the Board of Peace, without our regional partners stepping up, it would have been unimaginable. It was unimaginable just months ago when the entire region was at war. Those are the normal moments. That's the better life. We want to see more of that in Gaza. But there's one obstacle: Hamas. Hamas must accept that they will not have any role in Gaza, directly or indirectly, through weapons and terrorism and violent intimidation. I think we're all unified in that vision. That also means that Hamas and other terrorist and militant groups must demilitarize. They must irreversibly surrender their path of terror, their offensive infrastructure that they've wasted billions and billions of dollars in supplies on. They must move away from the tunnels and weapons production facilities, not try to hide them. We heard a very realistic and comprehensive plan from High Commissioner Mladenoff, who briefed this council, as we promised during the negotiations for 2803, to keep the council informed. We heard a reasonable plan for demilitarization. The U.S. and our partners on the Board of Peace, in consultation with the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, the NCAG, will continue to press Hamas. We will not ease up. We will not look away. And for those here who state in speech after speech they're committed to the two-state solution, we have to ask ourselves, will Hamas seek a path of peace and politics, or will Hamas seek a path of terrorism and war? The time is now. Those negotiations are happening right now, today, and in the coming week. So for those with those relationships, now's the time to use them, because that's the obstacle to what we talk about here month after month after month. So if we're serious about actually unlocking that path to peace and not having these meetings and passing them on to the next generation, this week is the moment. And I encourage all of you to press Hamas to the path of peace. That's it. It's really that simple. We, from our perspective in the United States, will continue to support the International Stabilization Force as it seeks to enable the NCAG to create the conditions for governance and stability in Gaza. I want to particularly thank Kazakhstan, Albania, Kosovo, Morocco, Indonesia, and others who are committed to stability, who are actually putting troops and treasure forward, more than words, for stability in Gaza moving forward. It's their work that will allow the IDF to withdraw from Gaza based on real standards, on milestones, on time frames, independent international monitors, all of that laid out in the plan, all governing demilitarization. But again, Gaza will not be safe, free, or prosperous if weapons are shifted from Hamas to one of its look-alike groups, or if weapons are simply shuffled around from one corner of Gaza to another for radicals to pick up later for yet another cycle of violence. Their weapons of terror must be permanently placed beyond reach. A decommissioning process supported by an internationally funded buyback and reintegration program is on the table. One party stands in the way. So we can continue to have these discussions, or we can use every element of diplomatic, economic, and other mechanisms that we have in our toolkit to press Hamas to accept what is a reasonable deal that they signed up for. If we do not get Hamas to disarm, and that means all of us must push them to disarm, and follow through on the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict that they agreed to, we may never get this moment back, at least in the foreseeable future. And so we urge all UN member states to join us in supporting this progress in line with this Council's historic Resolution 2803, which endorsed the comprehensive plan, welcomed the establishment of the Board of Police, paved the way for the NCAG, and authorized the ISF. Colleagues, the task facing the NCAG in particular is immense. We welcome the liaison office with the Palestinian Authority. Since the ceasefire, we have delivered significant concrete improvements to humanitarian access and aid delivery in Gaza. We're pushing every day to make that process better through the Civil Military Coordination Center, and we are pushing every day to expand it. We know that life in Gaza remains difficult and uncertainty about the future is high. But I will state over and over again, we must be honest about what's holding Gaza back. It is Hamas. It is okay to all of my colleagues in the UN Secretariat and otherwise to say that out loud, to call that out for what it is. We have a plan for reconstruction and development in Gaza. There is financing, there are partners ready to build, there is a pathway to peace, there is ease security restrictions, there's a path to prosperity. The moment Hamas agrees to demilitarize, a new chapter in Gaza's history will be written. Colleagues, it's as simple as that. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Muchas gracias, Excelencia. Panamá agradece a la Presidencia de Bahrein la convocatoria a este debate abierto trimestral, así como a las detalladas presentaciones de los expositores que han dejado en evidencia el momento particularmente complejo que enfrenta el Medio Oriente, donde las tensiones persisten, aumentan y evolucionan simultáneamente, generando un entorno cada vez más frágil y volátil. En Gaza, a pesar de las iniciativas internacionales impulsadas en los últimos meses, como acabamos de escuchar, al menos 637.475 niños en edad escolar siguen sin acceso sostenido a educación presencial. Más de 18.500 pacientes en estado crítico, incluyendo 4.000 niños que requieren evacuación médica, y alrededor de 81% de las estructuras están destruidas o dañadas. Panamá insta a continuar garantizando un acceso humanitario pleno, sostenido y sin restricciones, así como a facilitar de manera urgente las evacuaciones médicas necesarias para salvar vidas y avanzar en esos esfuerzos internacionales para aliviar el sufrimiento de la población. Mientras tanto, en Cisjordania, de acuerdo con cifras presentadas por Naciones Unidas, solo en marzo se registraron 21 palestinos muertos, 306 heridos y 521 personas desplazadas, que se suman a 39.000 personas desplazadas en el periodo reciente, reflejando un deterioro constante de la situación sobre el terreno. Panamá reitera la necesidad de cesar la violencia, prevenir el desplazamiento forzado y evitar medidas que continúen deteriorando las condiciones necesarias para una solución política sostenible. En el Líbano, desde el 2 de marzo del 2026, la escalada de violencia ha dejado miles de muertos y heridos, además de decenas de miles de desplazados en refugios colectivos, y se han registrado ataques contra trabajadores de la salud, los cuales consideramos inaceptables. Reiteramos, igualmente como lo hemos manifestado en todos los conflictos globales, la importancia de respetar plenamente la soberanía, la integridad territorial y la independencia política del Líbano, así como de reconocer y apoyar los esfuerzos de su legítimo gobierno, que ha insistido en la necesidad de un alto al fuego que ha sido alcanzado por la mediación de los Estados Unidos y que ha permitido y facilitado los canales de diálogo entre el Líbano e Israel. Instamos a que el actual alto al fuego se extienda y sea consolidado. Panamá rechaza los ataques perpetrados contra los cascos azules de las Naciones Unidas en el Líbano, que han resultado en la muerte y en heridas graves de miembros del personal, quienes cumplían funciones esenciales en el marco del mandato de la UNIFIL. Expresamos nuestras más sinceras condolencias y solidaridad con todos los países contribuyentes de tropas afectados, en particular con los contingentes francés, indonesio, ganés y polaco. Reiteramos que los cascos azules nunca deben ser objeto de ataques, por lo que debe garantizarse plenamente su seguridad y la libertad de movimiento de la misión en estricto apego al derecho internacional y a la resolución 1701. Presidente, la situación en Yemen sigue siendo alarmante, con millones de personas que necesitan asistencia humanitaria, incluidos 2.2 millones de niños menores de 5 años que requieren tratamiento por desnutrición aguda en una de las crisis más graves del mundo. Panamá reitera su profunda preocupación y rechazo por las acciones de los hutíes destinadas a obstaculizar la entrega de ayuda humanitaria, así como las detenciones del personal de las Naciones Unidas y de organizaciones humanitarias que contravienen el derecho internacional y agravan el sufrimiento de la población. En cuanto a Siria, continúa desarrollándose el proceso de transición política, por lo que subrayamos la importancia de preservar al país al margen de la inestabilidad regional y de los efectos de las dinámicas de conflicto en su entorno inmediato. Siria debe mantener el control de su propio destino, con plena soberanía sobre la totalidad de su territorio, como lo ha logrado hasta el momento. Por ello, es imprescindible el respeto pleno al acuerdo de separación de las fuerzas de 1974 en el Golán como un elemento esencial para la estabilidad regional. Instamos a todas las partes a abstenerse de las acciones que puedan comprometer su implementación. Por otro lado, la evolución en torno a Irán la situación en torno a Irán genera cada vez mayores preocupaciones. La peligrosa escalada en el estrecho de Hormuz, caracterizada por el intercambio de ataques y represalias, ha evidenciado la rapidez con la que las tensiones pueden ampliarse más allá de un solo escenario, aumentando el riesgo de una mayor desestabilización y afectando directamente a múltiples estados de la región, con consecuencias económicas globales. Destacamos la actitud de contención demostrada por los países del Golfo, que pese a haber sido objeto de ataques, han optado por evitar una escalada mayor, privilegiando la búsqueda de condiciones para alcanzar nuevamente la estabilidad regional. Reiteramos nuestra solidaridad y respaldo con los países del Golfo y otros que han sido ataques que no han sido provocados por ellos, e insistimos en la urgencia de evitar una escalada mayor y de preservar, ampliar el cese de hostilidades por todas las partes como el primer e impostergable paso para generar confianza y negociaciones que contribuyan al retorno de la estabilidad regional y de la seguridad marítima. Presidente, para finalizar, Panamá reafirma su respaldo al respeto de la soberanía, la integridad territorial y la independencia política de todos los estados de la región, principios fundamentales de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas y base indispensable para la estabilidad y la paz. La experiencia en la región ha demostrado de manera reiterada que no existe una solución militar a ningún conflicto en curso. La estabilidad y la paz no se imponen, se construyen sobre el diálogo, la diplomacia y la negociación de buena fe como los únicos caminos viables que abordan las causas profundas y generan condiciones reales para la coexistencia pacífica. La región exige decisiones que pongan fin a estas hostilidades, decisiones que permitan recuperar la confianza, decisiones que devuelvan a la población civil, incluidos los niños, la posibilidad de vivir en condiciones de dignidad y seguridad. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
I thank you, Mr. President. I thank also the Kingdom of Bahrain for convening this important and timely quarterly open debate. We also thank ASG Khayari for his insight and knowledge, and the presidents of also the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of Norway, Palestine, and Latvia in this meeting. We also thank Mr. Tony Blair for his remarks. We meet at a moment of acute and escalating instability in the Middle East. These consequences are not confined to the region. They are reverberating around the globe, shaking the very foundation of the peace and stability and security. Let me begin with occupied Palestinian territory, because some wounds are too deep to silence and some cries for justice cannot wait. Just days ago, in northern Gaza, a pregnant woman carrying twins were killed by an Israeli regime artillery shell along with her 2 children, Hamza and Naya. The 2 children, not in distant headline, but in a home that once held laughter, bedtime stories, and dreams for the future. We don't know if the twins she carried were boys or girls. We would never know their names, never see they grow up, never witness them enjoying the love and care of their family and community. How many more Hamzas and Nayas must be loose before world stops turning away? 2 more lives are now gone, where too many have already perished in some of the worst documented crimes against humanity in the 21st century. How many more pregnant mothers cradling life within them must be shattered by shelling before we take action and hold the occupying power accountable for the atrocities against the very meaning of humanity? Mr. President, in the West Bank, we are deeply alarmed by the surge in settlerist terrorism, which has reached unprecedented levels. We condemn the deliberate attacks on ambulances and systematic restrictions of medical supplies. These are not random acts, but a premeditated obstruction of the fundamental right to health and life, and further worsening any already dire humanitarian situation. The recent approval by the occupying Israeli force to establish a school in Sheikh Jarrah is a calculated move to alter the city's demographic and cultural character, reflecting a persistent disregard for international law and the Palestinian rights. The occupying Israeli regime's escalating campaign against UNRWA must stop. Israel must allow unfettered humanitarian access in the occupied Palestinian territory. Any restriction on aid, including food, water, and medical supplies, is a violation of international law. The future of Gaza and West Bank must be determined by Palestinians themselves. In that regard, we welcome the current efforts to hold local elections in the West Bank and in the municipality of Deir al-Bala in the Gaza Strip, as this represents a vital opportunity for Palestinians to exercise their democratic rights. The end of Israeli regime's long-standing occupation of Palestine and establishment of a sovereign independent state of Palestine with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital in accordance with relevant UN resolutions and Arab peace initiatives remains the only viable pathway to achieving a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace. Mr. President, turning to Lebanon, the blue line situation remains dangerously volatile due to repeated Israeli violations of Resolution 1701 and risk of miscalculations. Somalia condemns reported Israeli occupying force attacks in southern Lebanon, which have killed thousands of civilians, mostly women and children, as well as an attacks of UNIFIL that killed and injured Ghanaians, Indonesian, and French peacekeepers. Targeting peacekeepers is a war crime. Those responsible must be held accountable. We welcome the April 16 ceasefire and its extension facilitated by the US, enabling the first direct engagement in years, and urge full adherence to the ceasefire arrangements and respect for Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity. On Syria, Somalia remains concerned about Israel's destabilization actions in Syria. The occupied Syrian Golan Heights remain Syrian territory under Resolution 497 requiring full Israeli withdrawal and compliance. A Syrian-led political process under Resolution 2254 is essential for unity, sovereignty, and return of refugees. Mr. President, turning to the wider Middle East, a recent escalation represents one of the most dangerous developments in recent years. The expansion of the conflict into maritime air and territorial domains have brought the region to the brink of wider confrontations. In this context, Somalia welcomes the ceasefire arrangement between the United States and Iran, facilitated through Pakistan. We commend the brotherly nation of Pakistan for its mediation role and all efforts aimed at de-escalation and urge the parties to build this momentum toward a durable and comprehensive political misunderstanding. Mr. President, beyond the Middle East, Somalia condemns the so-called recognition of a separatist enclave in northwestern Somalia and rejects Israeli regime's recent appointment of the so-called ambassador, a move done as a cover for establishing Israeli military bases in Somalia. This not only violates Somali sovereignty, but also threatens the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea stability, and is part of the broader forced relocation scheme targeted Palestinians. Somalia unequivocally rejects any demographic or territorial alteration under this pretext. Across all these crises, a clear pattern emerges: the erosion of international law, persistence of impunity, and absence of political will to resolve conflicts at their root, particularly the long-standing violation of Israeli occupying regime in the region and now in the Horn of Africa. Most vividly, Palestine has estimated 1.2 million children in Gaza are reported to be losing even that voice, silenced not by choice, but by trauma and injuries from attacks. They are suffering in silence, unable to speak at all. So I will end with this Arabic proverb, and I say this with urgency. عندما سكت أهل الحق عن الباطل توهم الأهل الباطل أنهم على الحق. This loosely translates, quote, when people of truth remain silent in the face of falsehood, the people of falsehood become deluded that they were on the side of the truth. End of the quote. Mr. President and members of the Security Council, do not let your silence become that lie. Speak and take action before another mother, another Hamza, another Naya is silenced forever. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席，我欢迎扎耶尼外交大臣主持今天的会议，感谢基亚利助理秘书长、艾德外交大臣和布莱尔先生所做的通报。一段时间以来，中东局势急剧升温，影响持续扩散蔓延，严重冲击地区稳定，影响世界经济和能源安全。习近平主席郑重提出关于维护和促进中东和平稳定的4点主张，包括坚持和平共处原则，坚持国家主权原则，坚持国际法治原则，坚持统筹发展和安全，为走出冲突、实现和平提供了中国方案。当前局势来到战和转换的关键阶段，中方呼吁各方抓住和平窗口，保持最大克制，拿出最大诚意，坚持政治解决方向不动摇，保持停火和谈判势头不倒退，争取早日恢复中东和海湾地区稳定。主席，巴勒斯坦问题始终是中东问题的核心，在任何情况下都不应被边缘化。几十年来，巴以冲突 循环往复，根本症结在于两国方案只实现了一半。以色列国早已建立，而巴勒斯坦国仍遥不可及。如今激烈冲突虽已停止，但巴勒斯坦人民仍被迫与死亡和苦难为伴。巴勒斯坦备战领土局势仍在持续恶化，两国方案基础面临被掏空风险。动荡与战争不是巴勒斯坦人民的宿命，国际社会必须拿出最大的紧迫感，扭转负面局势，纠正巴勒斯坦遭受的历史不公。我讲3点。第一，加沙不是永久的战场，必须立即结束平民苦难。国际社会促成加沙停火的努力值得欢迎，但巩固停火、扩大援助仍是紧急任务。去年10月以来，以色列频繁发动袭击，强化军事建设，造成800多人死亡和2000多人受伤。加沙人道危机仍然严峻，生存物资短缺，卫生条件恶劣，医疗系统濒临崩溃。中方呼吁有关各方，特别是以色列，全面遵守停火协议，实现加沙全面持久停火。以色列应履行国际人道法义务，取消人道准入限制，保障联合国近东巴勒斯坦难民救济和工程处等人道机构开展援助。第二，定居点活动不可接受，必须缓解约旦和西岸紧张局势。当前，以色列加速扩张定居点，近日再次批准34个定居点建设，启动重建已关闭多年的萨努尔定居点。西岸暴力形势同样令人担忧，定居者暴力愈演愈烈，占领方频繁开展搜查、抓捕、袭击，甚至制定专门针对巴勒斯坦人的死刑法律，加剧紧张局势。定居点活动违反国际法和安理会决议，长期非法占领不会让任何一方更加安全，只会加剧恶性循环。以色列必须听取国际社会的强烈呼声，立即停止非法定居点活动，切实遏制定居者暴力，并对所有袭击事件严肃问责。第三，两国方案不容否认，必须支持巴勒斯坦独立建国。当前，以色列方面不断传出反对两国方案的呼声，甚至扬言扼杀巴勒斯坦建国想法，这令人关切。两国方案是解决巴勒斯坦问题的唯一可行出路，任何破坏两国方案基础的单边行动都必须予以坚决拒绝。任何安排或成立新的机制都应当坚持8人制8原则，促进而不是破坏两国方案。我们欢迎巴勒斯坦上周顺利举行市政选举，国际社会应加大对巴勒斯坦的支持力度，推动早日建立以1967年边界为基础，以东耶路撒冷为首都，享有完全主权和独立的巴勒斯坦国。中方愿继续同国际社会一道，推动结束巴勒斯坦人民苦难，落实两国方案，早日实现巴勒斯坦问题全面、公正、持久解决。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Excellences. Merci d'avoir organisé ce débat. Je remercie Monsieur Mohamed El-Khiari, sous-secrétaire général pour le Moyen-Orient, l'Asie et le Pacifique, Son Excellence Monsieur Spenbart Eide, ministre des Affaires étrangères de la Norvège et représentant du comité de liaison ad hoc, et son Excellence M. Tony Blair, membre du Conseil exécutif du Conseil de paix, à qui nous souhaitons la bienvenue, pour leurs exposés à la fois opportuns et éclairants. J'ai également écouté avec grande attention les présentations de son Excellence Madame Varsen Agabekian, ministre des Affaires étrangères de Palestine, ainsi que de notre collègue israélien, son Excellence Dani Danon. Monsieur le Président, le conflit au Moyen-Orient ne doit pas détourner notre regard, le regard de ce Conseil et de la communauté internationale, de la Palestine, où la situation se dégrade à un rythme alarmant, que ce soit à Gaza, en Cisjordanie ou à Jérusalem-Est. Gaza. 6 mois après l'adoption de la résolution 2803 qui endosse le plan de paix du président Trump, celui-ci doit être pleinement mis en œuvre et suivi régulièrement. Il était opportun de pouvoir entendre le mois dernier M. Mladenov, de pouvoir écouter aujourd'hui M. Blair. Leurs exposés démontrent l'intensité des efforts réalisés pour améliorer la situation. Pour autant, les exposés initiaux le démontrent, le cessez-le-feu reste précaire, la situation humanitaire demeure catastrophique et la France appelle Israël à lever les entraves à l'aide, à protéger les personnels et installations de l'ONU, y compris l'UNRWA, à faciliter les évacuations médicales via l'OMS. Nous attendons de la phase 2 l'amélioration concrète de la situation des Palestiniens. Ce sera le premier pas vers la reconstruction, le moment du déploiement du Comité national pour l'administration de Gaza, préparant le retour d'une autorité palestinienne réformée. Le désarmement du Hamas est indispensable, car ce mouvement terroriste dont chacun connaît et condamne les buts et les méthodes, d'avenir à Gaza et en Palestine. La France salue le lancement du Fonds de l'ONU pour la Palestine, destiné à soutenir le relèvement précoce dans le respect du droit international, des droits fondamentaux des Palestiniens et de l'unité de la Palestine, avec la pleine application de l'autorité palestinienne. La France s'apprête à y contribuer en complément de son soutien aux ONG et agences onusiennes. Monsieur le Président, en Cisjordanie et à Jérusalem-Est, la situation est alarmante. L'approbation de 34 nouvelles colonies, les déplacements forcés et les attaques de colons sont inacceptables, comme tout ce qui relève d'une tentative d'annexion de facto. La France est favorable à des sanctions de l'Union européenne et se réserve de nouvelles réactions si ces dynamiques se poursuivent. Nous appelons également Israël à revenir sur la loi élargissant le champ de la peine de mort en raison de son caractère discriminatoire et contraire aux engagements démocratiques. L'autorité palestinienne est au bord de l'effondrement financier, entravant ses capacités d'action et de réforme. La France appelle à la reprise immédiate des versements de recettes fiscales dues et à la levée des restrictions sur les correspondances bancaires. La France salue la tenue des élections municipales en Palestine le 25 avril, dans un contexte difficile, et elle félicite l'autorité palestinienne et la commission électorale. Elle doit ouvrir la voie à des élections présidentielles et législatives permettant la pleine expression démocratique du peuple palestinien qui y aspire depuis bien longtemps. Monsieur le Président, la France est engagée en faveur de la solution à 2 États, dans l'esprit de la déclaration de New York, largement soutenue par l'Assemblée générale. Les réunions du comité de liaison ad hoc et de l'Alliance globale le 20 avril à Bruxelles ont confirmé ce large consensus international. Il nous faut recréer un horizon politique crédible vers un État palestinien sans lequel aucune stabilisation durable ne sera possible dans la région. Monsieur le Président, le droit d'Israël à la sécurité, le droit d'Israël de garantir sa sécurité, ce Conseil le reconnaît et la France l'a toujours reconnu. Il doit s'exercer dans le plein respect du droit international, du droit humanitaire et des droits des États et peuples de la région qui, eux-mêmes, doivent respecter pleinement le droit d'Israël à l'existence et à la sécurité. Telle est la clé de la paix. Au Liban, nous avons salué, nous appuyons les décisions historiques prises par le président et le gouvernement pour établir la souveraineté de l'État sur l'ensemble de son territoire, et en particulier les décisions interdisant les activités militaires et sécuritaires du Hezbollah, qui a fait une erreur stratégique majeure en entraînant le Liban dans une guerre qui n'est pas la sienne. Le cessez-le-feu et l'ouverture courageuse de discussions directes entre Libanais et Israéliens constituent une première étape bienvenue pour offrir un répit après un conflit meurtrier et ouvrir la voie à une solution politique durable. La France salue la mobilisation des États-Unis. La situation reste fragile. Face aux violations, la France appelle les parties à cesser les violences et à respecter les droits internationaux, notamment la résolution 1701. Elle condamne les attaques contre la FINUL et elle rend hommage aux 6 casques bleus décédés. Elle poursuivra son soutien aux autorités pour renforcer la souveraineté de l'État, en particulier le monopole des armes et l'intégrité territoriale. Monsieur le Président, enfin, en Iran, il n'y aura pas de solution durable à cette crise sans que le régime iranien ne consente des concessions majeures et un changement radical de posture permettant la coexistence pacifique de l'Iran avec son environnement régional. La France appelle au rétablissement immédiat de la sécurité et de la liberté de navigation dans le détroit d'Ormuz. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Liberia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We salute the gallantry of the men and women deployed across the Middle East in peacekeeping duties under increasingly difficult conditions. We express condolences to all peacekeepers who have paid the ultimate price in the search for peace in the Middle East and other hotspots around the world under the blue flag. We pray for the full recovery of all those injured in the selfless pursuit of peace and wish their families well. Mr. President, we express our appreciation to the briefers, Mr. Khaled Kari, the Assistant Secretary General for the Departments of Political and Peacekeeping Affairs and Peace Operations, His Excellency Mr. Espen Barth Eide, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Norway and representative of the Ad Hoc Liaison Committee, and Mr. Tony Blair, member of the Executive Board of the Board of Peace, for their insightful interventions. We also welcome heartily the participation of the Observer State of Palestine, represented by Her Excellency Ms. Vassin Agabikian, the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Expatriates, as well as the distinguished representative of Israel, and the many excellencies and distinguished colleagues of member states taking part in today's important debate. Excellencies, this council meets while the history of the Middle East is still being written in blood. This is not dramatic. It is being realistic. But the truth is that a course correction is not yet beyond us. The present pause, however, in large-scale violence must not be mistaken for peace. Ceasefires may interrupt warfare. The truth, however, is that they do not, by themselves, resolve the political disagreement that produced the war. The lesson before us is, therefore, a sobering one. When diplomacy repeatedly arrives only after devastation, which has been the unfortunate tale of the Middle East conflict, peace becomes about reconstruction instead of what it should truly be, about prevention of a war. Liberia speaks with the humility of a nation that learned through painful experience that wars prolonged by grievance do not end when the battlefields become quiet. They mutate into economic ruins, institutional decays, and inherited traumas. My country knows what it means when justice is deferred in the name of strategy. We know that the pursuit of absolute security through permanent escalation often produces not strategic victory, but strategic exhaustion and overall insecurity. A conquest that requires permanent vigilance is not peace. It is deferred instability. This truth is urgently relevant today. Mr. President, in Gaza, as we have heard from the Secretariat, the humanitarian situation, while improving, remains desperate. Tens of thousands of lives have been lost since October 2023. Entire neighborhoods have been erased. More than 370,000 housing units have reportedly been damaged or destroyed. Gaza's economy has contracted by over 80%, with development indicators pushed back by decades. These are not merely statistics of destruction. They are indicators of a political failure, one that is so profound that humanitarian relief alone cannot and will not repair it. We thank the Board of Peace, the United States, and all countries contributing to the progress which have been reported to us by Mr. Blair. What is also true is that Gaza cannot, again, become an internationally funded humanitarian holding pattern, rebuilt materially, abandoned politically, and left strategically combustible without being properly and thoroughly disarmed. Reconstruction without irreversible political architecture will only recycle fragility. Liberia, therefore, calls for a time-bound international framework that links recovery, governance, accountability, and a credible, irreversible pathway toward the two-state solution. BRICS alone cannot build peace. Cement without political courage merely rebuilds future ruins. Mr. President, Excellencies, as the Assistant Secretary General reminded us, the Palestinian question remains central to peace in the Middle East. And the crisis is no longer geographically confined. From Gaza to the West Bank, from the Blue Line to the Red Sea, from the Strait of Hormuz to Yemen and Syria, we are witnessing the dangerous fusion of unresolved grievances into interconnected regional instability. It is worth repeating because it is true. When nearly 1/3 of globally traded seaborne oil and a significant share of liquefied natural gas transit through vulnerable maritime corridors, disruption in the Strait of Hormuz is not a regional inconvenience. It is a systemic global threat. For vulnerable economies, especially in Africa and certainly in my country, rising fuel prices mean higher food costs, weakened fiscal spaces, disrupted fertilizer supply chains, and millions more already at the risk of poverty slipping deeper into poverty. For Liberia, one of the world's leading maritime registries, attacks on international shipping are not abstract geopolitical events. They truly are assaults on the legal arteries of global commerce, sovereign equality, and international order. Mr. President, freedom of navigation through international waterways, as we heard a lot of from many member states yesterday, is not optional. It is a legal obligation. The obstruction, weaponization, or militarization of these routes risks transforming regional war into global economic depression. Liberia, therefore, reasserts the African Union affirmation that international law cannot be selectively applied, whether on land, at sea, or in humanitarian access. The forcible displacement of civilians, therefore, must not be normalized. Territorial acquisition by force cannot and must not be legitimized. Humanitarian aid must not and cannot be permitted to be weaponized. And maritime passage cannot be obstructed. Excellencies, the selective enforcement of law does not preserve order. It actually weakens it. This Council must confront an uncomfortable truth. Resolutions repeatedly invoked but inconsistently implemented do not strengthen our credibility or the credibility of the international community. In truth, they erode it. Resolutions 2720, 2735, 1701, 2334, and 2803 cannot remain ceremonial texts recited in this chamber while realities on the ground move in the opposite direction. our collective resolve to implement our resolutions is the real difference between peace and security in the Middle East. Liberia reaffirms its support for the inalienable political rights, dignity, and statehood aspirations of the Palestinian people, alongside Israel's right to security, guaranteed not by perpetual siege, but by enforceable coexistence within internationally recognized parameters, all of which are enshrined in many resolutions concerning the Middle East. These objectives are not contradictory, as we have just heard from both distinguished representatives. Durable peace through permanent insecurity of the other is neither desirable nor sustainable. Neither side can secure durable peace through the permanent insecurity of the other. Mr. President, the choice before this region is no longer simply war or ceasefire. It is whether leaders will invest in peace, however imperfect, and doing so today, or pursue absolute advantage tomorrow, only to inherit insecurity across borders, economies, and generations. The Middle East does not need another generation being taught to survive unresolved history. It needs leadership, and it needs it desperately. One that is willing to resolve the conflicts that is faced by the Middle East today with courage and unity of purpose. Now, not tomorrow, so a future generation has a better chance of a peaceful life and the chance of good neighborliness. My country's own history, and excuse me if I'm passionate, my country's own history teaches us that the most dangerous conflicts are often not those that cannot be ended, but those postponed until their political, human, and economic costs multiply so exponentially they become almost impossible to manage or resolve. We therefore challenge this council not merely to manage the fragmentation of the Middle East, but to architect an irreversible path to peace. The Middle East does not need a perfect solution. It needs a renewed will, a renewed sense of urgency and determination, a new sense of good neighborliness and determination by this council. In the spirit of Resolution 2803, where occupation ends, where security is mutual, where aid reaches civilians unimpeded, where navigation remains free, where diplomacy is preventive, not performative, knowing that peace without justice will continue to be fragile. Justice without implementation is delusional and fictional. And diplomacy without courage is merely a delay of the dreadful inevitable. Liberia chooses an imperfect peace over a perfect war. The time has come, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, excellencies. The time is upon us, not simply to call for peace, but to construct one that is durable enough to outlast fear, grievance, and the resultant war itself. The people of the Middle East deserve nothing less. They are not asking for our sympathy. They are asking for our collective will to help them help themselves, and they deserve it. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of Liberia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is right that we retain the focus on Palestine, and the significance of this discussion is evident from the high-level participation that we see in the chamber, from His Excellency the Foreign Minister of Bahrain, who was presiding over this session, to many other distinguished ministers who are here, and including the distinguished Foreign Minister of Palestine, whom we welcome. We thank ASG Khaled Kyari, Foreign Minister Espen Barth Eide, and Mr. Tony Blair for their briefings. President, the serious situation in the Middle East remains extremely volatile, with multiple and interconnected crises. In this environment, strict adherence to international law, the UN Charter, relevant UN Security Council resolutions, the principles of restraint, responsible conduct, and diplomacy are indispensable to prevent further escalation and to promote durable peace. And this was so eloquently put across by my neighbor, the Ambassador of Liberia, in his statement just now. But we see that in Gaza, the ceasefire provided relief, but remains fragile, with violations ongoing. More than 800 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli strikes since the announcement of the ceasefire, underscoring both the scale of the crisis and the sensitivity of the situation. Humanitarian aid has resumed, but faced with impediments and thus falling significantly short of the requirements on ground. It is essential to fully respect and consolidate the ceasefire and ensure sustained, unhindered, and scaled-up humanitarian assistance. We hope that Phase 2 of the Gaza peace plan will be completed at the earliest. Any delay risks eroding the hard-won momentum and deepening human suffering. The Gaza peace plan, as endorsed in Security Council Resolution 2803, must be implemented fully in letter and spirit. President, the rapidly deteriorating situation in the West Bank is also alarming. Escalating settler violence, continued expansion of illegal settlements, and illegal legislative measures aimed at land confiscation are grave violations of international law that seek to alter the demographic and legal character of the occupied Palestinian territory. In a joint statement on 2nd April, the foreign ministers of the Group of 8 Arab and Islamic countries strongly condemned Israeli legislation and warned against the increasingly discriminatory, escalating Israeli practices that entrench a system of apartheid and a rejectionist discourse that denies the inalienable rights and the very existence of the Palestinian people in the occupied Palestinian territory. In a separate joint statement on 23rd April, the ministers also condemned the repeated violations of historical and legal status quo of the Islamic and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem by the Israeli occupation authorities, particularly the ongoing incursion into Al-Aqsa Mosque. Such actions must cease immediately. The high-level conference in July, together with the General Assembly's endorsement of the New York Declaration last year, has established a credible multilateral pathway towards the realization of a Palestinian state. And efforts led by the US President, Mr. Donald Trump, supported by the Arab and OIC countries, have advanced the comprehensive peace plan. We hope that all these efforts, including the Board of Peace under the framework of Resolution 2803, will lead to concrete steps towards the implementation of a permanent ceasefire, further scaling up of humanitarian aid, reconstruction of Gaza, and realization of the right to self-determination of the people of Palestine through a credible, time-bound political process, resulting in an independent, sovereign, and contiguous state of Palestine based on pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds, Al-Sharif as its capital. In Lebanon, the Israeli military actions, particularly in the south, have resulted in more than 2,000 civilian casualties. The extension of the ceasefire for 3 weeks, brokered by the US, is a welcome development. But violations continue, as we saw over the weekend. There must be complete cessation of hostilities. Full implementation of Resolution 1701 also remains essential for stability. And in Syria, Pakistan supports a comprehensive approach based on full respect for its sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity, and supported by inclusive political progress and sustained humanitarian and economic support. In Yemen, a Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned political settlement supported by consistent international engagement remains the only viable path to lasting peace. Broader regional tensions continue to pose serious risks to international peace and security, as well as to global economic stability. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz is adversely impacting countries around the world, including Pakistan. Pakistan reaffirms its full support for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of all brotherly states in the region. We stand for universal respect for international law and pacific settlement of disputes. At this critical juncture, restraint, dialogue, and diplomacy must prevail. Pakistan remains actively engaged in advancing such diplomatic pathways and advocating for a peaceful resolution of this crisis. The recent talks hosted in Islamabad between the US and Iran stand as a testament to this commitment. Pakistan will continue to support and facilitate efforts aimed at fostering dialogue and stability across the region. The root cause of instability in the Middle East remains the unresolved question of Palestine and the continued Israeli occupation of the Arab lands. Not the expansionist ambitions, not the suppression of rights, not the use of force. It is the vocation of occupation, the realization of a Palestinian state, the two-state solution. That is the only viable pathway to a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace for all in the region. Pakistan will continue to support that objective while reaffirming its unwavering solidarity with the Palestinian people and their just cause. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Господин председатель, благодарим Халида Кьяри, Эспена Эйда и Тони Блэра за их брифинги. Приветствуем участие в сегодняшнем заседании минных дел Палестины. Господин председатель, мы весьма обеспокоены динамикой ситуации на Ближнем Востоке. Неурегулированность застарелых конфликтов и попытки решать их с наскока, сочетая грубую силу и язык ультиматумов, обходя международные форматы, дает горькие плоды, которые мы сегодня пожинаем. Такая линия, при которой интересы одной стороны полностью игнорируются, естественным образом вызывает отторжение и сопротивление. В итоге вот уже 2,5 года регион лихорадит от периодических вспышек вооруженного насилия, сменяющихся кратковременными и неустойчивыми перемириями, которые то и дело нарушаются. Так в Ливане, несмотря на достигнутое между Бейрутом и Западным Иерусалимом прекращение огня, продолжаются активные боевые действия. Только 26 апреля в результате израильских ударов 14 человек убиты и еще 37 получили ранения. Со 2 марта жертвами конфликта стало более 2500 ливанцев. Почти 8 тысяч были ранены. Израильтяне оккупируют юг страны, планомерно уничтожают целые жилые кварталы, подрывают мосты через реку Литани. Для них не существует понятия ливанского суверенитета. Их корабли свободно патрулируют побережье Ливана, а самолеты и беспилотники хозяйничают в небе над столицей. Нет уважения у Израиля к авторитету миротворцев ООН. Временные силы ООН в Ливане вынуждены за 2 суток спрашивать дозволения у израильского военного командования на движение патрулей. Однако и это не панацея. Голубым каскам чинят всевозможные препятствия, по ним стреляют, в том числе из танков, что уже привело к гибели миротворцев. Ну а чтобы ООНовцы чего лишнего не увидели, им выводят из строя камеры наружного наблюдения. Требуем скорейшего расследования всех инцидентов, связанных с угрозами безопасности миротворцев. Виновные должны понести заслуженные наказания вне зависимости от своего положения. Призываем обе стороны к уважению режима прекращения огня и неукоснительному соблюдению основополагающей резолюции Совета 1701, подразумевающей, среди прочего, уход израильских подразделений с ливанской территории. Без этого условия любые мирные договоренности останутся крайне неустойчивыми, как это случилось с перемирием, достигнутым в ноябре 2024 года. Господин председатель, курс Израиля на планомерное расширение оккупации, сохранение своего военного контроля и свободы рук с односторонними требованиями о демилитаризации при отказе от каких-либо собственных обязательств на сегодняшний день стал определяющим фактором на Ближнем Востоке. При этом зачастую в качестве оправдания агрессивным действиям мы слышим попытки возложить все на якобы деструктивную активность внешних сил, строящих козни против Израиля. Ущербность такой аргументации наталкивается, например, в Сирии, с территории которой за последние годы не прозвучало ни единого выстрела в сторону Израиля. Готовы в Дамаске к серьезному диалогу с Западным Иерусалимом по комплексному решению вопроса безопасности. Несмотря на все это, Израиль продолжает оккупировать юг Сирии, подыгрывает центробежным силам и регулярно наносит авиаудары, подрывающие возможности сирийских военных. Призываем израильские власти вернуться к соблюдению положений соглашения о разъединении сил от 1974 года и уважать профильные резолюции Совета Безопасности ООН, включая последнее решение Совета, резолюцию СБ 2811, продлившую на очередные полгода мандат сил ООН по наблюдению за разъединением. Не следует путать политическую мудрость и стратегическую выдержку Дамаска со слабостью. Чаша терпения может и переполниться. Господин председатель, в центре ближневосточного регулирования по-прежнему остается палестинская проблема, без справедливого решения которой невозможно обеспечить прочный мир и безопасность. Нынешнее израильское руководство не только полностью отвергает, но последовательно демонтирует закрепленные в многочисленных решениях Совета Безопасности Генеральной Ассамблеи ООН базовые принципы урегулирования, прежде всего двугосударственную формулу. Заведомая нереалистичность и нежизнеспособность предъявляемого оппонентам выбора предварительных ультиматумов не смущает израильских лидеров, явно заряженных на продолжение вооруженной конфронтации. Особое сожаление вызывает то, что такие взрывоопасные действия, которые уже привели к большой войне на Ближнем Востоке, пользуются безоговорочной поддержкой Соединенных Штатов. На этом фоне, несмотря на в целом оптимистичные выступления господина Блэра, не видим каких-либо ощутимых результатов от работы Совета мира. Забуксовало и выполнение принятой уже 5 месяцев назад по инициативе Вашингтона резолюции Совета 2803. Впрочем, что и требовалось доказать, и чего требовалось ожидать. Международные стабилизационные силы в Газе по-прежнему не развернуты. Национальный комитет по управлению анклавом все так же находится за рубежом. Больше половины сектора, оккупированного Израилем, доступ остается затрудненным. С момента прекращения огня 10 октября убито 800 палестинцев. К сожалению, оправдались наши мрачные прогнозы. Мы наблюдаем попытки буквально откупиться от палестинцев красивыми бизнес-проектами в стиле Нью-Газа, а не решать сложнейшую политическую проблему создания собственного независимого палестинского государства со столицей в Восточном Иерусалиме и границами 1967 года. Не лучшая обстановка и на Западном берегу, который остался за рамками резолюции Совета 2803. Там продолжается ползучая колонизация, регулярные рейды, а также насилие со стороны радикальных поселенцев. Ущемление Израилем позиции ПНА, в том числе лишение причитающихся ей налоговых отчислений, весьма опасный и тупиковый курс, ведущий не к укреплению израильской безопасности, а к радикализации палестинского общества. В этом же ряду деструктивная линия Западного Иерусалима в отношении БАПОР, остающегося незаменимым хребтом гумсодействия палестинцам, как на ОПТ, так и в соседних арабских странах. Мандат агентства имеет особое значение в общепризнанной международно-правовой основе БУ, в первую очередь в плане содействия палестинцам и обеспечения их защиты до момента реализации ими права на возвращение. На этом фоне одной из немногих позитивных новостей стало успешное проведение муниципальных выборов в Палестине. Символичным стало мирное голосование в Дейр-эль-Балахе, что продемонстрировало всему миру неразрывность Бри и Газы и тщетность попыток искусственно разделить палестинский народ. Господин председатель, в заключение хотели бы подчеркнуть, что ближневосточное регулирование не терпит поспешных и сиюминутных решений и не приемлет силовых подходов. Только внимательный учет интересов всех сторон с опорой на общепризнанную международно-правовую базу, включающую формулу двух государств, способен принести результат. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Monsieur le Président, la République démocratique du Congo réitère ses salutations respectueuses à son Excellence, Monsieur Abdel Fattah bin Rachid Al-Zayani, et remercie son pays, le Royaume du Bahreïn, pour l'organisation de ce débat ouvert de haut niveau dédié à la situation au Moyen-Orient, y compris la question palestinienne. Dans le même esprit, nous tenons à saluer une fois de plus la présence de leurs excellences les ministres et vice-ministres des Affaires étrangères à cette séance. Nous remercions également leurs excellences M. Espen Barth Eide, ministre des Affaires étrangères de la Norvège et représentant du comité de liaison ad hoc, M. Tony Blair, membre du conseil exécutif du Conseil de la paix, ainsi que M. Mohamed Khaled Kiari, sous-secrétaire général des Nations Unies, pour leurs exposés exhaustifs. Ma délégation salue l'engagement constant des Nations Unies et des partenaires internationaux en faveur de la promotion de la paix et de la sécurité internationale dans une région marquée par des tensions persistantes, comme en témoignent les développements particulièrement préoccupants récemment observés. La République démocratique du Congo exprime sa profonde inquiétude face à l'escalade des violences dans la région, notamment les affrontements récents impliquant plusieurs acteurs étatiques. Ces hostilités, par leur caractère désormais multidimensionnel, intégrant à la fois les dynamiques sécuritaires, humanitaires et économiques, ont causé des pertes civiles, endommagé des infrastructures essentielles et affecté des axes stratégiques de navigation avec des répercussions directes sur la stabilité régionale et internationale. Cette extension progressive des tensions, y compris dans le domaine maritime, illustre les risques d'un embrasement élargi et souligne, s'il en était besoin, que toute approche exclusivement militaire ne saurait offrir d'issue durable, mais exposerait bien au contraire la région à une escalade aux conséquences difficilement maîtrisables. Tout en rappelant la résolution 2817 du Conseil de sécurité, nous réitérons notre appel à la désescalade immédiate, à la retenue de toutes les parties et au respect strict du droit international, en particulier du droit international humanitaire, dans le plein respect des principes consacrés par la Charte des Nations Unies. Monsieur le Président, s'agissant de la situation dans la bande de Gaza, bien que se félicitant de la nomination du haut représentant du Conseil de paix ainsi que de la désignation du commandant de la Force internationale de stabilisation, sans oublier les efforts engagés en vue de structurer une réponse internationale coordonnée, la République démocratique du Congo demeure préoccupée par la fragilité du cessez-le-feu y établi dans le cadre de la résolution 2803 du Conseil de sécurité et par la poursuite des violences. Les restrictions en matière d'accès humanitaire, marquées notamment par la fermeture intermittente des points de passage de Rafah et de Kerem Shalom, ainsi que les violences sporadiques, compromettent les perspectives de stabilisation et pèsent sur la mise en œuvre des phases attendues du processus en cours. La République démocratique du Congo appelle de ce fait toutes les parties à honorer pleinement leurs engagements, à respecter leurs obligations internationales et à s'aligner de bonne foi sur les initiatives diplomatiques en cours. Par ailleurs, la République démocratique du Congo rappelle que, dans un environnement régional davantage interconnecté, aucune progression tangible ne peut être envisagée sans qu'il ne soit établi de cadre sécuritaire maîtrisé, impliquant notamment la limitation des acteurs armés non étatiques susceptibles d'alimenter les tensions et de fragiliser les efforts de stabilisation en cours. Monsieur le Président, nous ne saurons prendre la pleine mesure de la question palestinienne sans évoquer la Cisjordanie et Jérusalem-Est. L'expulsion des colonies, les violences et les déplacements forcés des populations dans ces territoires doivent retenir toute l'attention de ce Conseil. Il sied également de rappeler que ces actions compromettent les perspectives d'une paix durable et ne sauraient se perpétuer. Ces faits, notamment étayés par le rapport du Haut Commissariat aux droits de l'homme, sont susceptibles d'altérer durablement les paramètres d'une solution politique négociée et pragmatique conformément aux accords et aux dispositions du droit international en vigueur. Ma délégation rappelle que toute mesure unilatérale visant à modifier le statut des territoires concernés constitue une violation du droit international et des dispositions pertinentes des résolutions de ce Conseil de sécurité, notamment la résolution 2334. La Cisjordanie est également en proie à une situation humanitaire alarmante. À cet égard, la République démocratique du Congo souhaite souligner, une fois de plus, le rôle indispensable de l'Office de secours et des travaux des Nations Unies pour les réfugiés de Palestine, qui demeure un pilier central de la réponse humanitaire. Son action est essentielle pour fournir une assistance vitale, notamment les domaines de la santé, de l'éducation et de l'aide d'urgence. Nous appelons à un soutien renforcé et durable à l'UNRWA afin qu'elle puisse continuer à remplir pleinement son mandat. Monsieur le Président, réaffirmant son attachement indéfectible aux principes de la Charte des Nations Unies, en particulier l'égalité souveraine des États, le respect de l'intégrité territoriale, le respect de la dignité humaine, mon pays rappelle que ces principes ne sauraient être appliqués de manière isolée. Ils doivent en tout temps guider notre action collective de façon cohérente et universelle et constituer par eux-mêmes l'espoir d'un retour à la quiétude là où le spectre des conflits et des tensions se fait saillant. Pour conclure, la République démocratique du Congo souligne l'importance d'une approche multilatérale, équilibrée et impartiale et appelle la communauté internationale à intensifier ses efforts pour prévenir une aggravation du conflit régional et pour soutenir les initiatives de paix. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Democratic Republic of Congo for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
Gracias, señor presidente. Reciba, Excelencia, la bienvenida a esta reunión del Consejo. Agradezco al subsecretario Chiari, a su Excelencia, el ministro de Asuntos Exteriores de Noruega, el señor Espen Barth Eide, y a su Excelencia Tony Blair, representante de la Junta de Paz, por sus presentaciones. Saludo a las delegaciones que participan en esta sesión y doy la bienvenida a su Excelencia, la ministra de Relaciones Exteriores del Estado de Palestina. Señor presidente, han transcurrido más de 6 meses desde la puesta en marcha de la primera fase del plan de paz para Gaza. Sin embargo, las condiciones de vida de la población siguen siendo precarias. A los más de 72.344 palestinos asesinados por Israel desde el 7 de octubre de 2023. Se suman las muertes evitables por falta de atención médica, hambre, desnutrición, hipotermia y colapso del saneamiento. Estas no son muertes accidentales, son consecuencia de una política deliberada para privar a la población palestina de condiciones mínimas para una vida digna. Según la evaluación rápida de daños y necesidades, el desarrollo humano retrocedió 77 años. Millones dependen de ayuda que no llega en la escala necesaria. Los cruces permanecen en gran medida cerrados y Gaza es hoy el lugar más mortífero del mundo para periodistas y personal humanitario. Es imperativo garantizar el funcionamiento pleno de UNRWA, cuya labor constituye una línea vital para millones de palestinos, así como el acceso sin obstrucciones de las organizaciones humanitarias que operan conforme a los principios de humanidad, neutralidad, imparcialidad e independencia. La ayuda humanitaria no puede ser instrumentalizada. La reconstrucción de Gaza debe iniciar de inmediato sin condicionalidades. Mientras tanto, Israel intensifica su política de anexión de facto y violencia en Cisjordania, socavando la solución biestatal y la perspectiva de paz. No se trata de hechos fortuitos, sino de una política deliberada, alentada por un discurso de odio profesado desde los más altos estamentos del gobierno israelí que invita a la limpieza étnica, al uso sistemático de la tortura y tratos crueles y degradantes en centros de detención israelíes. Se suma la aprobación por parte del Parlamento de una medida inhumana y discriminatoria, la pena de muerte contra ciudadanos palestinos. Esta decisión profundiza un régimen de segregación y apartheid contrario al derecho internacional y debe ser revertida de inmediato. Señor presidente, La impunidad con la que el gobierno israelí desconoce sus obligaciones bajo el derecho internacional tiene consecuencias que trascienden a Palestina. Cuando hay un Estado que está por encima de las normas, se erosiona la credibilidad del sistema multilateral, incluyendo la de este Consejo. Lo ocurrido recientemente en Líbano ilustra esa dinámica. Los ataques indiscriminados contra la población civil no tienen justificación alguna y se producen en un contexto en el que las autoridades libanesas han mostrado disposición para avanzar en la estabilización de su territorio y la consolidación del monopolio del uso de la fuerza. Colombia expresa su solidaridad con el pueblo libanés y condena enérgicamente los ataques contra el personal de la Fuerza Provisional de las Naciones Unidas en Líbano. Estos actos pueden constituir crímenes de guerra y deben ser investigados. La rendición de cuentas no puede seguir postergándose. Este Consejo tiene la responsabilidad del mantenimiento de la paz y la seguridad internacionales, pero también todos los estados tenemos obligaciones a la luz del derecho internacional, incluyendo las normas de jus cogens. Es una responsabilidad colectiva no reconocer situaciones ilegales y no prestar ayuda o asistencia a su mantenimiento, máxime cuando se trata de crímenes de lesa humanidad. Todos los estados deben asegurar su cooperación con la Corte Internacional de Justicia y la Corte Penal Internacional, respectivamente. Iniciativas como las impulsadas en el marco del Grupo de La Haya demuestran que es posible avanzar en acciones colectivas para poner fin a la impunidad. Colombia no será cómplice de un genocidio. Señor presidente, para concluir, Colombia reafirma su posición de principio y su solidaridad con el pueblo palestino, que es el único llamado a decidir sobre su propio futuro. No habrá paz y seguridad ni para los palestinos ni para los israelíes mientras no se logre una solución política justa y definitiva que garantice el derecho inalienable del pueblo palestino a la autodeterminación. La paz no puede construirse sobre la ocupación, la segregación, ni la negación de derechos fundamentales. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Colombia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I thank Bahrain for convening this important debate. And I also thank ASG Chiari, His Excellency Espen Barth Edi, and Sir Tony Blair for briefing us today. The United Kingdom strongly supports the important work of the Ad Hoc Liaison Committee, and we welcome the constructive discussion that recently took place in Brussels. Colleagues, as we've heard today, the region faces another period of crisis. But we must not be distracted from seizing the historic opportunity to implement the 20-point plan for Gaza, endorsed by this Council in Resolution 2803, and map a pathway to realising a two-state solution. So Tony's briefing set out how we can do that. So I will make 3 points. First, it is vital that all parties fulfil their commitments, respect the ceasefire, and engage constructively to implement Phase 2 of President Trump's 20-point peace plan. We need a stable and phased security transition. This must include the demilitarization of Hamas and other armed groups, deployment of the International Stabilization Force, alongside a Palestinian-led police force, and the withdrawal of the IDF. The United Kingdom has been clear that Hamas can have no future in the governance of Gaza. We urge them to engage constructively with the demilitarization talks, which, as we've heard, are taking place right now. we also need the right transitional governance arrangements in place. The National Committee for the Administration of Gaza and the Palestinian Authority must work together to deliver for the Palestinian people's immediate needs and support early recovery and reconstruction efforts. Second, President, the humanitarian situation in Palestine remains grave. The World Food Programme has warned that whilst famine has not returned to Gaza, the food and nutrition situation remains deeply concerning. The UN reports that in the first quarter of this year, aid into Gaza from the UN and its humanitarian partners declined by 37% compared to the previous 3 months. This is not meeting the targets defined in the 20-point plan. And the government of Israel's deregistration measures for international NGOs continued to constrict the humanitarian space for critical assistance. This is unacceptable. The UN, including UNRWA and other humanitarian partners, must be able to operate unimpeded with unrestricted entry and functioning crossings. Israel must allow much needed medical equipment, shelter items and fuel in to support essential and life-saving services. And third, we are appalled by the deteriorating trajectory in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Violence, including extremely troubling reports of sexual and gender-based violence, forced displacement, and illegal evictions, is surging. According to OCHA, Israeli forces and settlers killed 33 Palestinians and injured 790 others in the first few months of this year alone. And last week, 2 Palestinians, Jihad Abu Naim and Ors al-Nassan, were shot and killed by an Israeli settler in a school. Ors was just 14 years old. We deplore such egregious acts of settler violence. The Israeli government has rightly condemned this violence and launched an investigation, but accountability for previous incidents has been severely lacking. Condemnation alone is not enough. It must be translated into concrete steps to prevent attacks against Palestinians, ensure protection of civilians in line with international law, and ensure accountability where crimes have been committed. We're also witnessing an unprecedented pace of illegal settlement expansion in the West Bank, as well as severe Israeli economic restrictions. These must stop. These actions undermine the 20-point plan and the very viability of the two-state solution. Mr. President, we stand at a historic juncture. We urge the parties to show courage, engage in good faith on the peace plan, and seize this opportunity for the benefit of Palestinians, Israelis, and for the whole region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of United Kingdom for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me thank SG Khaled Kari and His Excellency Mr. Espen Barth Ide, Minister of Foreign Affairs and representative of the Ad Hoc Liaison Committee for the briefings, as well as Mr. Tony Blair, member of the Executive Board of the Board of Peace, for his remarks, and Her Excellency Ms. Varsen Agapekyan, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the Observer State of Palestine, for her presence here today. We welcome also the presence of the representative of Israel. Mr. President, we acknowledge and warmly welcome today's discussion, which is timely and important. In relation to Iran, we welcome the ceasefire in the hostilities and express the hope that it will be sustained. Our objective must remain to return to the negotiating table with a view to achieving a peaceful settlement on all issues while fully ensuring that transit passage through the Strait of Hormuz will be unimpeded and safeguarded in accordance with the international law and the law of the sea as reflected in UNCLOS. I seize this opportunity to reaffirm our solidarity with Bahrain and other Gulf nations, along with our strong condemnation of the illegal and unprovoked attacks against them. Similarly, we hope that the most welcome extension of the cessation in hostilities to enable dialogue between Lebanon and Israel will be consolidated. We commend the U.S. mediation efforts and look forward to the success of the historic contacts between our two partners. Greece promptly stepped in for Lebanon in its hour of dire need, contributing humanitarian and development aid in a spirit of tangible solidarity. We fully stand behind the Lebanese President, Michel Aoun, and the Lebanese leadership as it takes up a historic and daunting task. Greece will continue its steadfast support to the Lebanese state institutions, including the Lebanese armed forces. We express our deepest condolences to the families of the Indonesian and French peacekeepers who paid the ultimate price while fulfilling their mandate. Attacks against UNIFIL are unacceptable and unequivocally condemned. They must stop. Mr. President, perhaps away from the immediate gaze of the world, the situation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem is steadily deteriorating. The increasing and unprecedented settler violence targeting the Palestinian population, including Christian communities, is condemnable and must cease. We reaffirm the absolute primacy of international humanitarian law, which must be respected at all times, and the protection of civilians, health workers, and journalists, notably among them. Also, the preservation and respect of the status quo of the holy sites in Jerusalem is of paramount importance. In the meantime, we are gravely concerned by the continuing trends of imposed restrictions, settlement expansion, and accentuated forced displacement. We reject efforts to undermine the viability of a two-state solution, depriving the region of a peaceful prospect. Similarly, we reiterate our call for the release of Palestinian tax revenues being withheld as the Palestinian Authority is on the financial brink. The health sector, including the East Jerusalem hospital network, also suffer greatly. The West Bank and Gaza constitute a single, indivisible territorial unit for a future Palestinian state, which brings me to Gaza, which regrettably features so frequently and intensely here in this chamber. We ought to seize the momentum introduced by the comprehensive peace plan endorsed by the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2803, which Greece supported, as Gaza transitions from conflict to a deeply challenging recovery. Governance arrangements must be legitimate and durable, while transitional structures should harmoniously complement existing institutions, avoiding parallel structures or undermining the Palestinian Authority. In this spirit, we welcome the establishment of a liaison between the Palestinian Authority and the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. We stress once again that Hamas and other armed groups must urgently and fully disarm, as addressing the legitimate security concerns of Israel is a key precondition for sustainable peace. Similarly, we call for the sustainable, unimpeded, and safe flow of humanitarian aid towards those in need in Gaza, highlighting the importance of efforts such as the Cyprus Maritime Humanitarian Corridor and the indispensable role of UNRWA does continue to play. Despite the challenges or the deplorable demolition of its facilities in East Jerusalem. Mr. President,
Ezra affirmed during the recent visit of the Palestinian Vice President in Athens for Greece, the path ahead can only be a credible political process leading to a two-state solution, allowing Palestinians and Israelis to live side by side in peace and security. As reaffirmed by the recent convening of the Global Alliance for the Implementation of the Two-State Solution in Brussels and the New York Declaration, the international community fully backs this prospect. We must now work together to mold these strands of effort into a coherent and collective vision for regional peace and prosperity. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me also thank our very distinguished briefers here today for their extremely useful updates, and welcome all the foreign ministers and deputy foreign ministers who are honoring us with their presence here today. Mr. President, following many weeks of conflict in the region, we welcome the ceasefire between the United States and Iran, and we commend Pakistan and other regional partners for their mediation efforts. We reaffirm our full support for Resolution 2817, condemning Iran's attacks against regional neighbors. We hope that the ceasefire will lead to renewed talks between the parties towards a lasting peace, and reiterate our position that Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. We call for the full, immediate, and unconditional reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to ensure the freedom of navigation in line with international law. Furthermore, we welcome the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, where the situation remains fragile. This was made painfully clear on April 18th, when peacekeepers from UNIFIL were attacked, leading to the death of 2 French peacekeepers, in addition to the earlier loss of 4 Indonesian peacekeepers, as well as the injury of several others. We strongly condemn these attacks and extend our deep condolences to the victims and their families. We firmly support the UN's extraordinary efforts to respond to the situation in Lebanon, and we call for rapid, safe, and unimpeded humanitarian access. We urge all parties to respect the territorial integrity of Lebanon, in line with Security Council Resolution 1701, and we are encouraged by the historic direct talks between Israel and Lebanon and hope that they will lead to new opportunities for lasting peace. Mr. President, the recent escalation in the region must not overshadow the deeply troubling developments in the occupied Palestinian territory. The situation in the West Bank continues to deteriorate rapidly. Settler violence has reached record levels. According to OCHA, this year, more than 10 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli settlers, and in March alone, 170 Palestinians were injured by Israeli settlers, the highest number in 20 years. Palestinians in the West Bank live in a constant stream of injustice and suffering. Relatives are killed or injured, property is demolished, water sources are obstructed, children are prevented from going to school. Land is seized as more settlements, illegal under international law, are legalized under Israeli law, rendering the chances of a lasting peace practically impossible. We urge Israel to immediately halt these measures, and we call on Israel to comply with its obligations under international law as an occupying power. We recall that attempts to change the demographic composition of the occupied Palestinian territory through forceful transfers or deportations are prohibited under international humanitarian law. Denmark further expresses its deep concern over Israel's recent approval of the death penalty bill and its de facto discriminatory nature. We remain strongly opposed to the death penalty, which we consider inherently inconsistent with human dignity. We urge Israel to abolish the bill. We welcome the reform efforts by the Palestinian Authority and encourage further efforts in this regard. We also welcome the organization of the Palestinian local elections on April 25th in these challenging circumstances. Mr. President, turning to the situation in Gaza, the ceasefire has now passed its 6-month mark, and while it still holds, the suffering in Gaza continues. Humanitarian access continues to be severely restricted, which constraints on humanitarian actors, medicines, shelter items, and other items considered dual use by Israel. we call on Israel to urgently remove all barriers for the effective delivery of humanitarian aid and allow for international NGOs and UNRWA to operate in the occupied Palestinian territory. Denmark continues to call for the full implementation of the 20-point plan consistent with Resolution 2803 and international law. Hamas must lay down its arms, as it's being discussed right now in the demilitarization talks, and Israel must lift its restrictions on humanitarian aid to pave the way for progress on the recovery and reconstruction of Gaza. We reiterate that Hamas cannot be part of any governance in Gaza. 6 months after the ceasefire, we had hoped for more progress. Mr. President, many of these points are well known and long-standing. They have been repeated in this Council on multiple occasions. The most urgent call, which Denmark reiterates resolutely today, is for the suffering to end and for the path towards a lasting peace through the two-state solution to be restored, as charted in the New York Declaration. We call on all parties to approach this with greater determination. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. There are still a number of speakers remaining on my list for this meeting. I intend, with the concurrence of the members of the Council, to suspend the meeting until 3 p.m. The meeting is suspended.